Good news, lads and ladettes. We've found Mabuchi. Bad news, he found us first, and we're but a small part of big plans. One of his subordinates records an interrogation. Mabuchi accuses Ichiban of being Seiryu, goading him into giving short, easily snipped answers, before launching into a speech about how the code of the Ijin 3 has been violated. The murder of Nonomiya was a trap, and we sprung it. For reasons we don't yet know, Mabuchi wants to destabilize the Great Wall. We're left to be killed at the hands of the warehouse workers. But we're saved by... Han? Han fucking Joon-Gi? We're free! Well, not really. There's actually a long slog ahead. I said I'd get stuck into combat later. Well, I'm stuck with it now. So it's finally your turn. I wanted to wait until all the key elements were in play, and here they are. This is the moment I knew to stop waiting on the combat to really take off and get good, as I realized, oh, this is all I'm getting. So, let's talk. Yakuza Like a Dragon has made the change to turn-based combat, and all I can ask is, why, lad? Okay, that's a bit dramatic. This change has created a bizarre little story all of its own. This genre shift was first revealed in an April Fool's Day 2019 video, and a pretty awesome one at that. Man, look at Nanba go. This looks crazy. What a funny little joke, but what if? Well, the story goes that positive reception to this gag led to the team uprooting what was meant to be another action title and making this a full-fledged RGG RPG. In this interview, Nagoshi states that that's more or less exactly the case. But god, I've gone back and forth on believing this story. At first I did, more out of wanting to than anything else. There's 3 reasons why. One is, it's a fanciful tale. It makes the development seem more romantic and daring, and I do think that can have a real psychological effect on you playing a game. It makes it seem more special. Its flaws and idiosyncrasies are softened because it appears rugged, like it was really trying. 2 is RGG's absolutely bonkers release schedule. They put Yakuza 2 out less than a year after 1. Who's to say they couldn't rejigger an entire game, build systems, and build a story around those systems 6 months out from release? 3 is the combat itself. Yeah, the gameplay makes this pretty believable. But there's a fly in this ointment, and it's a real pain because I've only just found this clip of Nagoshi saying the story that I'd come to think was apocryphal may well not have been. You see, Yokoyama says the genre shift was decided upon not in response to this video, but when the story outline was finalized. And this just makes more sense to me. It's an ensemble piece about a group of people rising from rock bottom and fighting against injustices in society. You were going to be fighting alongside a diverse set of allies you needed to feel a connection with. And they decided that turn-based battles with JRPG leveling was the best mechanical means to express this narrative, and I can't argue with that. It was also after the outline was locked in, they added Ichiban being an RPG fanatic to his character as a way to contextualize his gameplay. The battles have always been framed at least a little bit as abstractions, an exaggerated non-literal approximation of what really went down. Ichiban's overactive imagination is simply codifying this series-long tradition into an actual diegetic character trait, which is a brilliant reinterpretation of an unspoken series staple. Yakuza has always been great at expressing each character's personality through combat mechanics. Shifting the entire genre is the ultimate expression of that. Plus, Ichiban's class change from single target damage, self-buffing wrestling move moron to crowd clearing ally and all-inspiring hero is a clever bit of work. It's mechanical character development. It feels inaccurate to say Yakuza is now a turn-based series. It's more that Ichiban is a turn-based character, even if he is an infectious one. There's also another element of doubt. As opposed to the supposed positive reception, Yokoyama says in Japan people hated the reveal. 90% red thumbs, he claims. While the game was red hot on release in the West, it took Japan time to warm up to it, word of mouth steadily winning the crowd over. The game itself had to work its way up from rock bottom. Yokoyama reflects, as a creator that was the most satisfying moment. I managed to prove that my game was good. Well, look, I mean, it should be clear I love this game by now. I respect why the combat changed, but ultimately, I love the game in spite of it. I did not turn around on turn-based. So yeah, I simply don't know what the hell happened anymore. I genuinely struggle to believe they uprooted the game less than 6 months out from release to redo the entire genre, just given how deeply entwined the game is with this system, how the story flows, how the activities function. This feels like a JRPG from the ground up. So if what Nagoshi says is true, it is even more impressive. It does have that romanticism I gestured towards. But I just struggle to believe it. Obviously, when it comes to the series, you should take the creator's words over mine, but there are some contradictions here, and I had to rewrite this whole portion last minute because these two's words simply don't line up. I was hoping to be like, oh, myth busted, but the only thing getting busted here is my balls. So let's move on from how we got here to how we tackle what we got here. Before I judge the combat for what it is, allow me to be a little unfair and judge it for what it's not. When it comes to this kind of gameplay, I can't pretend, man. I'm not even a tourist. I'm a goddamn day tripper. You can count the number of turn-based battlers I've beaten on... well, it's 2 hands, but they've been Yubitsu-made. And we can argue I didn't beat Yeek. It beat me. Anyhow, after I'm done explaining my misgivings, I'll critique it on its level. I'm aware I've got an outsider's perspective, but I'm going to try and not be a total twat about it. More than one character in this series has talked about how they get to know someone through their fists. It's always a cool bit of dialogue, and until I sat down to make this video, I didn't realise, but I'm kinda the same way. Throughout my first playthrough, during boss fights and cool set pieces, my brain would often conjure up the thought, this is cool. I wish I was playing this. I promise you, that wasn't me trying to be snippy, snide, or snarky. That's what my subconscious offered up to me unprompted. That right there is my problem. I can only ever see what I'm not playing. Turn-based gameplay, especially in Yakuza, represents an impenetrable experiential wall which keeps me from feeling engaged. Every cool moment is something I'm not allowed to participate in. I can't get to know this game through my fists because I'm wearing oven mitts. You're not going to feel the heat through those. The feeling the brawling evoked deepened my connection to the story. I could feel the characters' personalities coming through via movesets, aggression, attack timings, and so on. When I'm immersed, health and heat bars feel less like strict parameters for how close I am to victory or defeat, but storytelling devices creating intense highs and lows. I felt like part of the drama. Now I feel apart from it. The combat in prior games was exactly to my tastes. Just enough mechanical depth merged with crunchy, cathartic combat, which satisfies my brain and lets me feel immersed in the high-octane events of the narrative. Here I feel less like a brawler and more like a bookkeeper, budgeting my assets against the enemy. I'm not a numbers guy, but these guys are all numbers to me. I gel best with games which grab me in a way where they begin to feel organic, where the mechanics create stories I can abstract or extract from the game. Turn-based combat just doesn't resonate. It's ironic that in this game where the combat is explicitly being filtered through Ichiban's heightened imagination, it actually feels more literal and objective to me than the old, less sensationalized brawling ever did. I know logically that both of these are, when stripped down, an exchange of resources. By attacking I take resources, and by defending I preserve my own. In real time this is done by dodging, blocking, and parrying, and in turn-based it's done by guarding, debuffing, and healing. But my brain is always going to interpret this as an event, and this as a maths problem. Maths problems can be fun, I guess. I'm too bad at numbers to know, but perhaps you're here for them and you see all this immersion talk as touchy-feely nonsense. Or perhaps you don't have the same hang-up as me and you can still see these battles as exciting exchanges, deriving dramatic highs and lows the same way I can only manage with real-time. Well, sort of. I can still do it with turn-based tactics. For whatever reason, my brain can still kind of see that as something exciting. Almost like I'm directing an action sequence. That's what I'm trying to interrogate with this. We all want slightly different things out of games, but we shouldn't be mistaking our wants for requirements, our mores for mandates. That what we like are the objective correct paths games must follow and straying from them a total mistake. That will only lead to stagnancy and burnout. Though arguing this way does admittedly get trickier when a series you enjoy makes such a dramatic pivot which is in your eyes for the worst. But I still think I gotta say it because I respect the daring. And the reasons for the change are undeniably commendable. But, all in all, I'm here in spite of the new gameplay, and that's the way it's always been. When I first started ideating this video shortly after 7's release, I was planning to play defense for the Yakuza fans upset about the genre shift because I'm one of them. Yakuza is such a unique mix you still can't really go anywhere else for. An RPG in a contemporary setting with small but dense maps, threaded together for enjoyable, unique, and expressive 3D brawling. The anger these fans expressed could at times be childish, but it's understandable where it's coming from. Well, it's 2025 now, and we know that real-time hasn't been abandoned. Sure, it only exists in the domain of spin-offs, and I still prefer the old feel that Dragon Engine still hasn't been able to replicate, but it's still here. I suppose I should talk about Like a Brawler. It's a mod by JH Rhino. Drino? Which cycles the game back into a brawler. Congratulations, Jay, you've given Ichiban aphantasia. I'd weigh up the combat, but I'd be comparing invisible apples and oranges. The mod's a ton of fun, and a really impressive piece of work. I bring it up for those who can't even stomach turn-based and don't mind fracturing the wholeness of the experience. As the mod's splash screen states, real heroes play turn-based. I hate knowing that even mentioning this mod is going to summon people who think an opinion like this is a battleground, and this mod therefore has to act as ammunition. I don't get the impression even for a moment it was made out of some spiteful attempt to fix the game. It's a cool experiment, not the opening volley of a pointless argument that will never end. To people who enjoy turn-based combat, I hope it's clear by now, I'm not trying to call it lesser, outdated, redundant, nothing like that. The issue is with me, not the system. It doesn't help, however, that the system present has issues all its own. It's appropriate if you think about it. Ichiban dumped in Yokohama, me tossed into turn-based. We're both dragon fishes out of water and it's sink or swim. I understand the basics of the genre. Set up your party to cover as many bases as possible, exploit enemy weaknesses while minimizing your own, focus down priority targets, and know roughly how far your resources are going to take you. I'm capable of that much. The problem with Yakuza 7 is basically that it's basic. Those basics aren't terribly thrilling, and it bungles it whenever it tries to go beyond those basics and carve out an identity. Now, gameplay doesn't have to be super complex to be good, but it has to stand on something, whether that's something it does which is unique, or something it does uniquely well. And I don't think this achieves either. Despite coming from a brawler series with a lot of unique staples which could be reimagined into turn-based mechanics, YLAT doesn't really leverage anything beyond the superficial to create some novel RPG street brawler hybrid. For instance, you'd think the mana bar would be heat. It's not, it's just a mana bar. The high-end essence attacks don't act like heat moves requiring you to set up specific conditions to trigger, they just drain the bar. What makes this different from most RPGs? Well, we drink energy drinks instead of potions. Its aesthetic flourishes, not much more. In an interview, the team said of Yakuza's combat that it's never been about depth but satisfaction. The series has never been urban rain, but it's always let me bring the urban pain. And they've tried to maintain this philosophy through the genre shift. These titles have always been made with middle-aged Japanese men in mind, not just as the core cast, but the core audience. It's meant to be for newer lapsed gamers trying or retrying the medium to be able to pick up and play, and I respect that, and that's why the difficulty has always been tuned low. In real time, this approach works wonderfully. The kinesthetics and animations are deeply satisfying, but part of what maintains that satisfaction through repetition is the mechanical skill, however rudimentary, which is employed. Especially in things like triggering heat attacks. Over time, setting up the conditions for each one gets smoother as skill develops, which keeps the animation acting as a reward. This doesn't work in turn-based. Every time I see a specific enemy or animation, it can only get less exciting. I didn't earn this attack, I chose it from a menu. It's as complex as changing channels. It can't achieve the same satisfaction because the mechanisms which deliver this feeling are simply too different. It would be a lie to say it has none of the staples. There is still some LADNA in here, mostly in the form of time-sensitive mechanics, mashing or timing inputs for bonus damage, or hitting block with familiar parry-like timing for minor damage negation. These feel good, especially the block. But these feel more like things to do, rather than instrumental skills to success or failure. One feature which actually does land for me are downed attacks. When a foe's knocked prone, you can quickly trade a turn for guaranteed critical damage. What's great about this is it does take some actual quick thinking. You have to mentally do the maths to work out if a character can close the gap, or if a turn is better spent healing or buffing instead, all while trying to ignore the simple temptation of punting a prone punter. The funny thing is, I think I've gotten off longer combos on downed opponents here than was ever allowed in real time. The most unique aspect is a focus on positioning, with a number of attacks having undisclosed firing lines or AoEs. This would be intriguing, were it not immediately hobbled by a total inability to position yourself. Thanks to this, many moves are rendered deeply unreliable, as you have no direct means to manipulate the battlefield. You have to spot opportunities, and quickly make them before the squirrely AI takes them away. Oh, and enemies don't stop moving just because you've started an attack. It's like trying to lead your shot in a tornado. Another neat touch is Ichiban can use improvised weapons, but only when he happens to line up with them, which isn't something you can plan around. This can also wind up being a hindrance if you've given Batboy an elemental weapon, which some of his best tools just so happen to be, as your element is going to be replaced for standard blunt damage. That does feel like a nitpick though, because so little of the choices you make in this combat matter anyway. The last thing which could set this gameplay apart is its presentation, appearing like an RPG approximation of a brawler. The issue is the disastrous amount of clunk. With characters awkwardly running into and out of position, getting snagged on the environment, and occasionally just having severe lapses in logic which can drag battles out far longer than if they just played it more safe. You can wind up resenting the presentation because it backfires. At least if you don't see the funny side of it. I can, sometimes. Depends on how funny each incident is. Some of the Dragon Engine slapstick magic has survived the jump. When systems fall into chaos and ragdolls are sent flying, I do adore it. I like this game best when I don't understand what's going on. What blows is this chaos isn't really capitalized on because the combat is trapped in a boring middle ground. Too chaotic for its positioning systems to be meaningful, yet far too static for this chaos to meaningfully influence the course of a fight. One enjoyable element of its presentation is the enemy variety, now called Sujimon, with exaggerated designs based on the kind of people you might see on the street, or else callbacks to past substories. They're all adorned with delightfully punny names and imaginative attacks to match. The greatest joy in combat isn't so much fighting foes as it is wondering what you may face next. And when you do face them, well, they're kinda like everyone else. Now there's a message of togetherness. We're all the same when you get down to it. We're all easily killed by a batshit man with a baseball bat. Seeing as 99% of the roster are human, much of figuring out their weaknesses falls to guesswork. I'm pretty sure all these elements would kill me, but let's not try and find out. Many strengths and weaknesses operate on lateral thinking and joke logic. Some are amusing, and I felt satisfied when I call them, like Yakuza type foes being weak to heat. That's funny. But most often, I'm just trying everything until it works. The aha moments are much rarer than the alright moments. Plus, no enemy brings with them truly unique mechanics. The most out there it gets are summoners or foes who have heavily specced into status effects, and that can mix things up a bit. I'd have liked far more chaotic foes, like hosts getting me drunk, hordes of hobos who beg me for money, construction workers who scatter stuff around the battlefield for everyone to use. The enemies are imaginative, but never inventive. None really mix up the gameplay. I feel like there should have been more of a party game vibe. If the aesthetics work for you, grand, but for me, no. Construction vehicles often operate as great beasts, and again, conceptually great fun, but these bring their own problem, in that they restrict mechanics. So they become simplistic exchanges of damage. And this isn't a uniquely mechanical mechanic. There are just too many enemies who've been given an excess of health and then been stacked with resistances. They're not hard to fight, they're just hard to get past. Then there's the job system. From Hello Work, we have a variety of vocations which we can employ in combat, each swapping out the weapons and abilities a character has access to, as well as fiddling with their stats. We could spend hours swapping out who does what and working out which doles out the most damage and bring a whole new meaning to the daily grind. It's yet another undercooked idea. Pretty much every character's bespoke job is their best, with two exceptions. The biggest perpetrator here is Ichiban with his hero job. It's a great damage dealer, strong against both bosses and mobs, as well as acting as a great healer and buffer. About his only weakness is how quickly he can burn through MP if the party doesn't share the load. Literally every other job is a step down. Nanba's Hobo class has him right at home with a good mix of spells, heals, and debuffs. It's kinda sad that Hobo is the best Nanba can aspire to be, but we all have our roles in the world. Adachi and Psycho, meanwhile, both get immediate access to what are essentially their base jobs but better. Detective is just a worse tank than Enforcer, and Psycho's barmaid is a watered-down idol. So I guess you two get promotions. I don't see swapping these two jobs over as optimizing, but expediting. Detective and Barmaid are just kinda restrictive and actively annoying to use in comparison. The other optional jobs are either uninteresting, or else give the impression of crude experiments. The devs exploring more advanced mechanics, but not yet having the confidence to be all that daring with them. The Musician has a voltage mechanic which barely does anything. The Breaker has self-buffs, but foes are often felled before you have any flow. Perhaps the worst is the Foreman, which could have done a lot more to foretell it was granting the one and only Metroidvania-style movement ability in the game. Something I missed completely on my first playthrough. Each job has 2 character skills, which when unlocked remain in their respective fighter's arsenal even after a change of vocation. It's a rigid system, and I'd argue pointless outside of the 2 optional super dungeons. There are maybe 1 or 2 useful character skills granting universal at all times access to rarer elements like ice or lightning, and unlocking these means putting in a lot of work just to make a couple of late game bosses go down a smidgen easier. But within this lies a deeper irony. If you were to take the time to unlock these, you'll have become so generally over-leveled getting there, the added flexibility you gain through these moves would be pretty redundant in the face of the sheer statistical strength you built up in the process. Who needs flexibility when you can just flex your bigger number? Or your bigger number? Speaking of optional moves, at the tail end of each drink link, you get a tag team attack. All but one is the same damage type, which to be blunt, is such a boring payoff. Give each character an element which represents them. Thing is, when you get down to it, this is still Yakuza under the hood. Who even needs a job in this economy? You'll be carrying so many recovery items, you can pretty much do whatever you want and be chugging along just fine, if you even have to. While writing one of the older videos, I thought I was going to have to joke about how, when I get to 7, I'm going to have to drop my old self-imposed challenge of not drinking during long battles given how the genre works. But I actually found I could go surprisingly long without, with the battles winding up about as dry as my throat, enemies going down as easily as an invigorating stamina. It's not long before most street battles devolve into me ending them in 1 or 2 turns with a broad swing of Ichiban's bats. On my New Game Plus, I did play hard for a bit. I didn't play Legend because Ichiban isn't a legend yet, and I figured it would turn fights from sourceless to slogs, and I was correct. But surprise, surprise, hard is hard. Enemies hit hard. What's crazy is the game started making specific demands of me and the combat actually developed a rhythm. It was short-lived as before long the game got obnoxiously difficult, but there was a Goldilocks zone where I was actually having fun and actually feeling like I was having to make tough choices to stay alive. Buffs and debuffs were now vitally important, but what really became key was controlling the turn economy via status effects. Enemies became so hard-hitting, I had to give them as hard a time as possible getting the hits in. Suddenly each turn and in turn each party member was important, as I knew I was always 1 or 2 bad choices away from game over. This story of underdogs fighting their way up from the bottom now had a vibe that if they were going up against an unfair society, they had to be just as tricky to get by. Battles now had a constant tension as well as a lot of plates to juggle and... Hang on, wait, what the hell is juggling plates? Oh fuck. On normal, so much of what you can do feels extraneous. Fun extras to try out and maybe make a boss more manageable for much of the game. Yet on hard, the pendulum eventually swings way too far in the other direction so as to become obnoxious. I'd argue a good base difficulty, where Yakuza 7 has some actual tactical back and forth and mechanical identity, sits somewhere between normal and hard. The game is so easy that choices like job types and what attacks you choose often don't even feel like micromanaging but mucking about. You've probably noticed me making a ton of suboptimal moves in my footage. That is partly down to my unfamiliarity with the genre, but it's also because I'm trying to make things interesting, because the game itself sure isn't holding up that end of the bargain. Taking myself out of the equation, however, an easier difficulty was a prudent choice considering many people coming over would be action fans, not necessarily JRPG fanatics. We could also argue the poor balancing as a result of this being RGG's first at bat for the genre, but it being easy was a conscious decision. They've said in interviews they've always wanted to give players a feeling of power, and I do think that's fine, but I do believe you need some amount of pushback for your choices to actually feel meaningful. And if it's too easy, the feeling of power is numbed for some people. RGG played it safe here, and that's not unreasonable, but they've yet to conquer the mystical realm of fun turn-based gameplay. They need to level up a bit for that. The game has opted for a standard RPG leveling structure. Do fights, get experience, level up. The only arguably unique element are distinct character and job levels which receive their own experience and can be individually modified via items if you want to make leveling go faster. This brings me to an issue I brought up last game which is naturally exacerbated here. I don't like out-leveling story content. It kneecaps my enjoyment and, especially here, harms the vibe for me. Ichiban and crew are meant to be scrappy underdogs. That doesn't feel right when they can't stop curb-stomping the competition. I experience a constant push and pull in titles like this. I want to do side content because I enjoy it, and hey, I may get a unique mechanic out of that. Maybe I'll get a fun new gameplay feature to take into the main content. But in doing said side content, I risk trivializing the main content, and I'm not to know, especially on a first playthrough, just how far I can risk pushing. Speaking of optional gubbins, things like masters and hidden unlockable moves are gone, replaced with a tiny selection of essence attacks which are rewarded for clearing side content, and aside from that you got hidden weapon shops. And if you want the maximum potential out of those weapons, well, you're going to be feeding them into the crafting system. And this is a real downgrade to me. There's a benefit in terms of legibility, this is all easy to track and follow, but it comes at a cost. That being, there's little thrill to exploration. There's no surprises, there's no finding a cool new move while you explore the fringes of the game. I remember as a kid, the only tips I would see for games like this are where to go to grind. Where to quickly get powerful so you can breeze through the bosses and the story with minimal effort. It never sounded like people actually enjoyed playing these games, just overpowering them so they could be put aside as efficiently as possible. I want these moments to have some bite. I want them to be as daunting as the narrative portrays them. It was an issue in 6, but in that game I could simply choose not to spend points. If this sounds crazier than Ichiban, I'm sorry. His mind goblins are far more fun and fantastical than mine. It's just that the more I engage with the content in this game, the more facile it becomes. The gameplay itself feels entropic. If I'm taking control of the curve, I at least want to feel like I wrested it from the game's grip, not just had the game's difficulty handed to me on an invisible dial. I'm aware there are occasional pop-ups informing me of the recommended minimum level for a story dungeon. I also remember the game's City of Heroes having a feature, which is probably in most MMOs, where if you joined a lower level party you were leveled down so as not to trivialize the content. I kinda wish Like a Dragon had something like that, an I want to feel it button. There is a problem with both of these approaches in that both kill the tension in their own ways. Perhaps I'm impossible to please. I've got to imagine people way smarter than me who get game design and are really invested in the JRPG genre have probably been butting their heads against this issue for way longer than I have, and there's no one-size-fits-all game solution. Now, all of this aside, when looked at on a narrative level, this system is again a perfect match for what Yakuza 7 is trying to say. This is a game about starting over from rock bottom, i.e. level 1, but it's also about facing the cruel, two-faced nature of society. By using standard JRPG leveling in this context, the game says the more you face society, the stronger and better able to face it you inevitably become. Growth is non-negotiable. Anyone can rise from rock bottom. Now sure, it says this in the goofiest way possible, but that doesn't detract from how hopeful it ultimately is. 7 has some pretty downbeat moments, but an undercurrent of optimism runs through all of it. In a way, this style of leveling, as rudimentary and standard as it is, may also be the most the RPG mechanics have ever actually tied into the themes of a Yakuza story. And part of me is always going to be annoyed because I just can't derive any joy from it. What's frustrating about the combat of Yakuza 7 is it so often hints at being interesting. But much like my central hang-up, there's a gulf between me and being mesmerized. While the basic attack, defend, item side of combat functions, that's about the most that can be said of it. There's a little intriguing about it beyond the modern day setting, amusing animations, and funny foes. But those elements have a limited shelf life. When the sheen is worn off, what you're left with is a boring and ill-balanced game. It's all such tedious janken pon. Okay, sorry. In a Dengeki interview, the team talked about how even 15 years ago, Yakuza was never really doing anything new, likening it to how Janken-pon, rock, paper, scissors, as well as stuff like traditional RPGs, are old systems, but they persist because they're very good. They see what they do as taking established mechanics and updating the fun, not by excessive refinement of any one element, but by immersing these old designs in a cool setting with a rich tapestry of systems, interweaving to create something greater than the sum of its parts. In this interview, they talk about how they hold a lot of respect for people who can put new twists on old formulas, and they feel it's their job as game designers to find novel ways of keeping these old vehicles for fun trucking along. I think it's a brilliant and insightful outlook, and I don't believe they lived up to it here. Everything which tries to go beyond the basics and lend gameplay a unique identity feels uncertain, contradictory, or non-committal. We got hamstringed homages with timed presses which only offer marginal changes to the numbers done in either direction. We have positioning, which is only ever an imposition. With no control offered to the player, a level of potential decision-making can't find its place. So it winds up existing purely in the service of presentation. A presentation which is self-defeating because of just how clumsy it is. All topped off with a work-shy job system which only serves to illustrate how bland the balance is. I didn't even mention Poundmates. 1-800 caller cameo. Callbacks and calling for backup have never been both so literal and needless all at once. Nothing here is allowed to matter all that much because the systems are either unreliable or optional, and as such can't have too much weight placed on them. All this achieves is flattening the gameplay. Its gimmicks shallow to the point they're closer to jangling keys than being the keys to mastery. And the way optional mechanics are treated can only wind up disappointing invested players, when their efforts to uncover them only see minimal return. That's unless they're aiming for the extreme end of optional content, which takes a lot of grinding and busy work. That's the thing, I can only imagine most of the mechanics pay off here. At the optional mega dungeon, it takes tens of extra hours to get strong enough to attempt. I obviously didn't feel the pull to get that far. I felt like I was combating ennui just as much as enemies. The thing is as well, I can't pretend to not be biased. When I look at this gameplay, a big part of me will always be seeing what I'm not playing. The old combat which this is replacing, which I just find so much more engaging. I respect the change, but I don't like it. It would not be able to carry a 50+ hour game unless it had something else going for it. Luckily, this is Yakuza 7. A game with so much heart that even if this part won't get mind racing, there's so much else to keep it ticking along. So we fight our way through Mabuchi's torturous torture dungeon. You gotta hand it to the guy. He walked us down a mile-long tunnel and didn't even keep the pleasure of killing us to himself. He left it to his men. I'd say that's the sign of a good boss, but look how it panned out. And I'm serious, this tunnel is a mile long. I'm amazed we didn't emerge in Kamurocho it goes on so long. I also want to mention that despite emerging from a Lumang hole, the place was filled with Yakuza grunts. Turns out Mabuchi didn't even need us for his false flag operation. I can spot a turf violation right here. It was probably Ichiban's imagination getting some wires crossed. Above ground, we find ourselves by the river. The group tries to put together Mabuchi's scheme. Adachi figuring his casus belli required a curious bellend, and that wound up being us. And now that we've given him the ammo to start his war, he's already gunning it. 2 Seiryu have been shot dead, and a truck full of Yakuza are barreling into Restaurant Row, with the vengeful Captain Takabe leading the charge. The Great Wall is quaking, and my muscles are shaking. So naturally, with all this excitement, 2 more dungeons in a row. Okay, that's unfair. They are a lot better than what we just went through. Having actual locales and narrative threaded into them is the honey which makes the melee go down. First, we have the Ichiban rushing to Restaurant Row, hoping to stop Mabuchi's war before it can really start. We're pursuing the Seiryu spearhead, desperately trying to catch up with the main wave before it crashes into Lumang HQ, beset on all sides by stragglers not caught in the initial push. It's a thrilling and unique set piece, albeit one which illustrates yet another issue with turn-based combat. The situation's pacing is kneecapped by how each battle becomes a break in the action, which is an unfortunate thing to have to say about the action. A classic real-time brawl would have better captured the desperate push onward this situation is attempting to convey. Though this is somewhat evened out by the tight quarters of Restaurant Row, which allow Ichiban's area-clearing swings to recreate the feeling of trying to claw our way through as quickly as possible. And we arrive just in time to make the entire situation even more complicated. Taking down Takabe just lets Lumang leader Cho take him hostage. Ichiban's attempts to further clear up the mess he's creating are only spreading the muck further. Takabe has already met Ichiban. He knows Mabuchi is pulling a fast one and simply doesn't care. 2 of his boys are dead, and the entire Lumang must pay. Meanwhile, Cho really doesn't like the insistent insinuation that his right-hand man is stabbing him in the back.
俺に説教すんの？
でもだからって焦って俺らを犯人扱いしても事態の解決にはならねえ。あんただってわかるだろ。
おっさん、口の利き方に気をつけろ。
I like this scene a lot. The energy is right back up, the situation is delightfully complex, Takabe's fury is undeniably righteous, and Cho works as a way to show just how much the stakes have risen, and one wrong word will have him come right down on the heart of the party. Sort of. While later reveals do make Cho's actions line up cleanly, I do find it funny how the way Ichiban gets us out of this is more or less to keep doing what's pissing Cho off, until he just so happens to do it in a way which the guy finds funny.
説教すんなって言ったよね。
説教なんかじゃねえ。クレームだ。あんただってでけえ組織のトップなら人の話くらいちゃんと聞けよ。
クレームか。
Making Cho realize Ichiban is so crap at arguing his case that this guy probably couldn't lie to save his life, which ironically enough saves Takabe's. Though our word is far from good enough. We need evidence that we're puppets on Mabuchi's strings, and when you need unassailable proof, there's only one place in the city you can get it: Gomi-Jewel. Arriving in Koreatown, the lad's path crosses with a mysterious woman. Sunglasses at night, eh? For when you just can't be shady enough. And much to Psycho's annoyance, the boys are beguiled.
美人に根っからの悪党はいねえんだよ。
そのスケベ根性、いつか絶対ひどい目に遭うわよ。
They're led by the head right into the spider's web, where if they want their info, they're gonna have to earn it. Fighting through Gomi-Jewel is unremarkable. I know saying it's better than the sewer level is about the faintest praise going, but it's the best I can offer. True to its name, it's easy to get snagged. Navigation is once again circuitous and this time claustrophobic on top. It manages to avoid being annoying in spite of this, but it's just not very interesting, aside from one standout moment. Word of advice: if you ever suspect you're walking into an ambush, remember to walk slowly into the open and scan your surroundings. If you can spot your would-be attackers within the hour or so, they'll have no choice but to step out and face you head on. Ichiban just doesn't have the best judgment, nor does 7 use judgment to the best of its abilities. But hey, at least there's more than one pussy to spot. These sections aren't terrible, but while the Seiryu HQ raid's tone and goals worked in tandem with the game mechanics to make it work, what it had was a trick that could only be pulled once. A comedy of errors with the untested party essentially failing forwards, but if you do that too often, you just turn the game into a farce. These later dungeons and action set pieces struggle to find their own interesting rhythms, and individually they're either dull or the gameplay and story don't cohere as strongly as they could. You can tell they want similar action beats as prior entries, but the mechanics lack the immediacy to make them work, at least not without a dose of imagination on par with Ichiban. In story terms, scaling Gomi-Jewel is the rollercoaster climbing before the next 4 chapters act as a thrilling descent. From this point onwards, twists, turns, and reveals come thick and fast. At the apex, we come face to face with a familiar face.
Han Joon-Gi と申します。
Uh-huh. So we're doing this again. And despite passing the test of strength, Joon-Gi assures us he could have taken us single-handedly. Yeah, sure mate, let me just remind you, last time something dangerous got in your head it was the Endia. Or at least I thought it was.
申し訳ございません。
So we're led into the heart of Gomi-Jewel. Oh, so we're doing this again. Couldn't go one new game without a new one of you. Or well, 2 new ones of something or other. What an absolute car crash of a sentence. It's so strange to me that one game after having Kage wordlessly disappear, we get yet another super informant. As part of the larger series, Gomi-Jewel's introduction feels so clumsy, awkwardly running back an element of the series they just attempted to grow beyond. But in isolation, as part of Yakuza 7's narrative, Gomi-Jewel is far more layered and interesting than Purgatory ever managed as part of its stories. Less pulpy, more down to earth, there's more actual inclusion in the narrative events. And that's because this information network isn't a get out of writing corner free card. It's an actual dramatic function of the setting, and instead of getting us out of a corner, it's about to put us in an even worse one. Despite Ichiban's imaginings of the Seiryu acting as the balance keepers in town, that role truly belongs to the Gomi-Jewel. Being the smallest of the 3 gangs, they use their surveillance network to make themselves invaluable to the 2 larger forces, weaponizing this and subterfuge to keep the peace. As Han puts it, they put out fires before they start, and they've got just what we need to extinguish Mabuchi's fiery ambitions. Video proof of him breaking into Otohime land. But before he can hand it over, Joon-Gi has yet another reveal in store for us.
なんか雲行きが怪しくなってきたか。しょぼくれた声出すなって。頼むぜ、相棒。
We're led even deeper into the complex, Nanba especially steeling himself as the gang is brought before a complex apparatus.
いつは偽札。エンド偽札だ。
The mysterious lady reappears. She's introduced as Son Hee, leader of Gomajul, and she takes off her glasses, revealing her eyes. Damn girl, you're serving Kent. That only works if someone we knew was under there. Though perhaps somebody does. The paper we'd found at Mabuchi's warehouse was meant to come here, with Cho in on the counterfeiting op. Mabuchi's crew happened upon the paper and started their own completely independently of Cho's knowledge. Or at least Mabuchi believes. Cho and Son Hee figuring it's better to let him waste some inventory than ask questions about the paper's true purpose. Which is the oddest, most indirect form of getting paid off I've ever seen, and it's likely why we got out of Restaurant Row alive. Cho's knowledge Mabuchi has already made moves behind his back allowed Ichiban to unknowingly prod at this weak point. What the Gomajul are producing here are extremely high-quality forgeries, made with cutting-edge technology aided by mint insider info. So I mean, hey, this is cool and all, but why are we being told any of this? Ah, our bill is indeed a misprint from this very place. And they demand to know how Ichiban came to possess one. Fortunately, his floundering panic once again relieves the tension.
でもあなたはその偽札が何かまるで分かってないみたいだし、つまりあんたにはここに来た特別な目的があるようには見えない。まあ、そんなに頭も良さそうじゃないしね。
Yeah, that's big words to say to the guy who just repurposed all your boys' faces into burger meat. Unfortunately, Ichiban isn't the problem here.
でも、お前は違うな、ナンバ
！All attention turns to Nanba, as his hidden motives are laid bare. He rolled into town half a year back hunting for his little brother, investigative reporter Shuichi Akiba, who disappeared as he apparently neared the truth of this very operation.
どこかに消えた。当然じゃねえ。
Nanba disguised himself amongst the homeless, believing it would let him stay beneath suspicion as he spied on Gomajul. When he stumbled on Ichiban's fake bill, Nanba knew he had to follow him, even if Ichi himself was blind to its true significance. It's a great moment. Just when it seems like Ichiban's bumbling persona has once again diffused the situation, it takes another, harsher step in complexity. That moment of relief which worked last time is revealed to be false, as Son Hee goes on to rub Nanba's deception in our faces. And Nanba himself sees his own acts as irredeemably selfish.
俺はよ、近いうちにお前の前からドロッと消えるつもりだったんだ。
And just after admitting to his lies, he immediately pivots into an Ichiban-style heroic gesture, begging for the group to be spared. The tension rises with him. And crumples just as hard. His grand display not half as shocking to Son Hee as the taser she downed him with. So, we're free to go. But it's then Ichiban hits the Gomajul with some real loyalty.
どこへ連れて行く気だ。俺らの仲間を。
あの男は自分の損得感情であんたを騙してたのよ。出会った最初からね。そんな人間を仲間って呼ぶの？
勘違いすんな。あいつは俺にとって仲間以上の人間だって言ってんだよ。
Just like with Arakawa, Ichiban refuses to see Nanba's actions as selfish, not even in spite of his more mercenary motivations. Those mean nothing to him. Ichiban outright rejects Nanba's betrayal, rejects standard storytelling conventions, and decides the emotional murkiness doesn't matter. He cuts right through it. And the hardened gangsters in the room hate that. Son Hee is insulted, emotions rise, and Han's guns go right up with them. The Gomajul descends into panic as this turns into a rescue. Yeah, go on, call for backup. They ain't getting back up. And we're left to fight with the apparent Han Joon-Gi. This is a surreal fight, man. Compared to the glitz and glamour of the Stardust Showdown, this is closer to a gank in a garage. Obviously it plays Theory of Beauty, but it's more like Query of Who's This Bitch? It's an interesting reversal of Han's prior fights and gives us insight into how this isn't quite the same guy we saw in 6. Back then, Han made a spectacle of fighting fair, which concealed a cruel, underhanded nature beneath a veneer of magnanimity. This mysterious imposter will, spoilers, turn out to be a genuinely well-meaning and mannered guy who just happens to fight dirty, making use of guns, knives, and poisons to tip the scales in his favor. But it doesn't outweigh us. That's what you get for being so headstrong. The escape sequence which follows is a farce, unfortunately. The gang covering for a winded Nanba as he makes his escape through a window by running through a gaggle of Gomajul grunts who just don't react. followed by Ichiban and Saiko just owning Son-hee with primary school insults, which are all delivered with awful timing.
そんなに怒るとストレスで老け込むぜ。
やっぱ女はおしとやかなのが一番じゃねえか。
ヒステリックなのは男受け悪いよ、ソンヒおばちゃん。
And I mean awful both in the sense the line timings are so dreadful as to make the scene even more embarrassing than the already awful dialogue, but also for thoroughly deflating the intensity of the moment. It's a sequence with sub-story level presentation which required the more dynamic main story cutscene flow, but as it is, it's a weird aberration, a moment which juts out so awkwardly as the climax to an otherwise smooth sequence. Son-hee is deeply frustrated, but she has seemingly given up on the prospect of killing us.
なら今日はもうこんなとこにしとかねえか。
She tells us we have no idea how much damage we just caused. Nanba leaking the counterfeiting operation will cause a Jincho to crumple, the group failing to understand why this is as much of a problem as it is. So we're told to come to Heian Tower later that night to learn why. Sure man, just keep giving me secrets. It's not like they're incredibly dangerous in my hands or anything. But before heading to Heian, the Ichigang decide to do a little digging of their own, fishing up a laptop Nanba had secreted away at the hobo camp, on which is a draft article written up by his brother, detailing a fake money scandal going back 50 years tied to politician Yutakaro Gikubo, chair of the Citizens Liberal Party, a paper-thin stand-in for the real-life Liberal Democratic Party, Japan's largest political group. Ogikubo's influence greatly exceeds his already powerful position, with Adachi saying some consider even the Prime Minister to merely be Ogikubo's yes-man. Oh god, please, let's not do that again. Still, without solid evidence, this article would be libelous at best, even though we know Shoichi was onto something. At Heian Tower, we still don't get our Peking duck, but we do get a peek behind the curtain.
Yeah, Kasuga-kun, genki?
Ichiban is apoplectic. Their men are out spilling each other's blood, and here they are, chilling.
トランプでもやってこの抗争の勝ち負け決めんのか。
そのアイディアいいね。
ふざけんなよ。すでに人が死んでんだ。
I love how Hoshino just shuts Ichiban down here, even though I don't think he's wrong. And given what we're about to learn, Ichiban's fury is merely a preview for how many are going to feel knowing what hides atop the Great Wall. I've also got to say, one of the more interesting, understated elements of this game is how so often Ichiban casually calls the twist only for others to brush him off. Not unfairly, given how much more complicated the situation is than anyone could guess until they're stuck knee-deep in it. It's a fun way to play these reveals, with Ichiban often being right for reasons he couldn't even fathom, and it once again backs up the idea the guy is sharper than he knows. Hoshino says the warring among the lower ranks is a necessary sacrifice to maintain the balance.
均等な三角形は外部からの圧力に対して高い強度を持つ。日本も独裁の構造から三権分立になった。
Adachi jokes the old man wants to talk post-war climate. Oh, he very much does. 60 years back, the town was stuck in perpetual conflict between the Seiryu and Lumang, and it fell to, at the time, fresh-faced city councilman Ogikubo to pull the plug on the bloodbath. He had to do this with no resources to speak of, so he instead came up with an ingenious plan to not only curb organised crime, but fill his own coffers. He approached the gangs with a joint counterfeiting operation, divvying up the responsibilities, and routing most of the money back to himself. By giving the heads of the gangs a shared interest in paying off most of the police, he effectively brought Ijincho's criminal underworld to heel, all while maintaining the illusion provided by the Great Wall, making Yokohama seem like too volatile a prize for outside forces to want to mess with. Then later rolling in the Go-Majul, who were what else but Jingwon exiles, with Hanhira a body double of their former leader. Frankly put, love this whole series of reveals. Yakuza 7 has some of my favourite crime politics in the series. It's an area where I feel the games can get spotty, with only 2, 0, and 7 juggling this perfect mix of interesting small-scale interpersonal relationships, while never making the high-level factional manoeuvring feel clumsy or too abstract. The dynamics between various characters cleanly translating into the larger motions of the plot, the relationships informing why things are going to pan out a certain way.
荒川真澄です。荒川。
Even in entries I love, like 5, the pieces on the board can all get so blurry. Here the focus is kept tight, with the theme of light and dark shining and casting shadows through every motion of the plot. Adachi, for instance, is strongly opposed, immediately calling this a false piece. Hoshino hits back by asking if results can't matter if the methods are flawed, before mentioning it took both the police and Yakuza to rebuild the country following the war.
明と暗それぞれが力を駆使し復興を目指しそれを遂げて現在がある
To which Adachi has no immediate comeback. It's such a human moment. Anyone would reflexively balk at such a plan, but the scale of the results speak for themselves, and they make an immediate response seem short-sighted. What's amusing to me is how one of the flattest villains in the series, Yakuza 4's Munakata, makes a similar argument to Hoshino. But from him it means nothing. He only ever said it because he was full of two things: himself and shit. Here, that same sentiment fertilizes an entire game's worth of central questions of light and dark, good and evil. Because Hoshino is a true believer, he doesn't play along with this plan for self-aggrandizement or power, but because he sees that it works. And now that we know the truth of Yokohama, there's a more immediate big question. Why are we still alive? Well, it all comes back to that note. The thing isn't for Karen, and now we've covered the past, the present issue is Nanba. If we want to know who gave us that note, we're going to have to bring the bum back before the Ijin free. But Ichiban isn't about to sell his mate down the river. Unfortunately for us, the fact Lumang assassins are already after him forces our hand, and Han is willing to give us a tip not yet shared with Cho. He figures if Nanba went anywhere, he sought out the help of Bleach. And it's as we approach their offices, the game hits us with an odd diversion. We're stopped by a former member of Gomajul, who as it happens is Matsuo's killer from way back at the Harbour Light job. Turns out Song-hee was very much against his execution, and so this guy's gone rogue. This beat comes and goes, but it does leave an odd stain which doesn't quite bleach out. Years ago I covered a title called Greedfall. The video isn't very good, I say a lot of naive shite and perhaps get too pissy with it. But one point I do stand by is how all the faction's greatest evils are too easily swept away. They're all the fault of an autonomous third party acting without the leader's knowledge or approval, easily dismantled at the drop of a hat the moment their transgressions are brought to light. I very much disliked this because I felt it made the game too wishy-washy. It made each group far less interesting by not allowing any room for moral ambiguity in a story which desperately needed it. Yakuza 7 is effectively guilty of the same thing from here on out, with this guy's biggest victim not being Matsuo, but the ambiguity. The issue stems from the fact the story has decided we need to like Son-hee now, so she can't be too ruthless. So the game hurriedly spit-shines her image in a way which is clumsy, transparent, transparently clumsy, and clumsily transparent. It makes it feel like the narrative lacks confidence in its characters to win back the crowd in slower, more organic fashion. Or else stop one or two asinine online comments from going, you can't like Son-hee? Remember that guy she killed? Yeah, she's a mob boss. I figured that guy wasn't the first. I do this weird thing where I hold fictional characters to different standards. Yakuza 7 is telling a far richer story than Greedfall, but I still think it cheapens proceedings a little when each group needs to have their malevolence laundered just as much as their money. We enter the Bleach office.
Oi, 誰だこんな時間に?
Hey Kume, wanking hard or hardly wanking? Inside we find Dickhead Classic, Dickhead Neo, and the head of Bleach Japan, Ogasawara. Here to support the Yokohama branch. He is very much a Bleach guy, saying the police are lax and the grey zone's rampant. Oh buddy, the things we know could make your head spin. Which is probably a service you could get around here. Nanba's already let them in on the money printing operation. So Ichiban tells them, right, time to go. To which Ogasawara asks why it's them who should be running. Leading to Ichiban spilling even more about the operation. Yeah, good going there, guy. Kume, clearly out of his depth, thinks we're bluffing. But Ogasawara is a far cry from his ungainly underling, knowing we're deadly serious.
やれやれ。久米君はまだ事の次第を分かっていないんです。
Yeah, the adults are talking, Kume. Pipe down. Ichiban doubts the man is a civvy. He is, but he has some backing. And out walks Lao Ma. And with that, the Bleijin Free leave us to the man who knocked off Nonomiya, Nanba telling Ichi he's simply here for his brother. Mabuchi is, much like every other boss we've seen so far, not really much of a fight. He has a 2-hit combo and some sweeps for crowd control. What's cool is, I believe this is the second appearance of heat auras in the game. First seen on Sawashiro, but now popping up again. I like to read this as the game suggesting this is the point in the story where we've strayed into the domain of truly dangerous adversaries. We've left the paddling pool of power scaling, and are now facing challenges which would give prior protagonists pause. Thematically, it's an amazing bit of escalation.
体から真っ赤な炎が出てるように見えるぜ。
お前の想像力すごいな。
なら俺たちも同じぐらい気合い入れねえとな。
The actual danger and depth of this fight doesn't really match that assessment, mind. What we learn next, however, certainly does. Bleach and Mabuchi are backed by the Omi, a Trojan horse meant to infiltrate the region. Mabuchi's murder plot is a means to destabilize the Great Wall, while Bleach lays the groundwork for an invasion. As Mabuchi proclaims, he's going to be the Arakawa of Ijincho.
おやっさん、てめえと一緒に語んな。
Nanba returns, telling us Ogasawara has already slipped out the back. His demeanor has changed. He's gone from the apologetic, pleading Nanba we saw just after his motivations were laid bare, to blunt, cold, trying to seem stern and uncaring as he raises a sledgehammer to the Great Wall in the hopes of finding his brother in the rubble. His cold front is pretty easily heated, however.
止めたきゃ止めろ。なんなら背中からかかってきても構わねえぜ。
俺らがお前にそんな真似するわけねえだろ。くだらねえこと言うなよ。俺たちは仲間だ。ああ、うるせえ。
We're not safe for long here, so Adachi says we should quickly check the office, and it's back there Ichiban makes a startling discovery. Tokyo governor and Bleach founder Ryo Aoki is Masato Arakawa.
死んだはずだぜ。はあ？こいつ。若だ。
If you weren't so obsessed with phones back in Kamurocho, you may have spotted the phony Ichi. I love this shot on a replay. We cut to Aoki's Tokyo office, where Ogasawara calls for backup.
余っている分をそっちに回す。
Back at Survive, Psycho isn't quite as convinced as Ichiban.
やっぱり年も若と同じだ。
そう焦んないでよ。
It seems the young master has risen in the world. Literally, no chair. And that's just the start of the incongruities. Aoki has a pretty airtight backstory, though Adachi again points out how someone of Masato's means could fabricate a background like this. And his Kamuro 3K plan, which won him such approval, wouldn't have worked without Masumi. You know, nothing brings a family together like crushing several hundred others. The remaining Ichiban decide that's more than enough revelations for one night. We gotta get our beauty sleep. Have to be well rested for the invasion tomorrow. But we first awake to news there's trouble within the wall. Hamako warning us the elderly eradicator Totsuka is hunting Ichiban and we should probably stay clear of her house. So naturally we head right on over. News of the counterfeiting operation has already spread and there's mutiny within the ranks. Man, the invasion hasn't even started yet and this town's going to pot. But I suspect it will turn up any... Ah, there it is. Joe lets us know there's an Omi-backed Bleach Japan mob about to sack the Gomi jewel and we'd better head over. He'd check it out himself, but the Lumang's got a bit of a coup on at the moment, so his hands are tied. Arriving on the scene, Kume is as happy as a pig in shit, and naturally none too bothered by his fellow zealots getting a little overzealous. This is another great little Kume scene. It's the most powerful he's been so far, and it highlights just how small he is. He thinks he's in a position to make the group grovel, but a light insult from Psycho is all it takes to utterly deflate him. And lamer still, how fake his convictions truly are shine when we tell him his men are of a Kansai Ben. And their Kansai Ben doesn't beat the allegations half as hard as we beat them. This is all so revealing of him. He doesn't truly believe in anything, he doesn't believe in bleaching the grey zones, he just wants social power, and bleach is merely a pretense to it. We tried to stick around to rub it in, but bleach has gone balls out. Hey, I don't think protest permits will cover that. I think that's a Yakuza. We try to infiltrate the crowd, but we're frankly too colourful for this bunch, and soon find ourselves in the Wrecking Ball's trajectory. Boom! Bleach the grey zones red! It turns out the man piloting the vehicle is Omi Alliance Lieutenant Reiji Ishioda, the free keyest of Arakawa's free key subordinates alongside Sawashiro. In gameplay we may beat, but in story we beat a retreat. Han, however, saw our attempted defense of Komijul, and thinks us worthy of a special gift. We're cryptically pointed to the nearby Mother's Vow restaurant. In the back is a secret passage leading to the Komijul's residential district, and with it, a hidden passage into the complex. Inside, word has come down from Okakubo. The operation is to be burnt to the ground. All links between him and the Ijin 3 need to be severed. And Son-hee feels her debt is sufficient to demand that she will go through with this, torching their home if it's what he needs done. And much to Han's shock, she begs us to help hold back the tide until the job is done. Ichiban and Adachi are hesitant. It falls to Saiko, who up until now has had no love for Son-hee, to see how severe the situation is for her to bow. We stand in Bleach's path, Ogasawara directing the charge, with Nanba absolutely furious. What follows is an enjoyable fight, at least from a scenario perspective. A tag team boss battle against Ishioda and Nanba. I'd say this fight lacks wrecking balls, but I should say, I do love Nanba, but it is really, really funny to beat the shit out of him. Oh, come on, don't go labeling him a former friend. I'm just too easily charmed by fights against former playable characters. The operation goes up in flames, with Bleach fleeing the scene. Their leader Ogasawara captured in the scramble. Nanba's defeated, his last hope for finding his brother literally gone up in smoke.
Nanba, いい仲間を持ってるな。
仲間なんかじゃねえ。
どうやらお前は誤解をしている。
With no secrets left to protect, Son-hee comes clean about Nanba's brother. He's safe and well, having been held in the residential district for trying to crack Gomajul.
本当か。
マジか。なんで教えてくんなかったんだって、そりゃ無理か。
この事実が手に入れられたのは我々に手を貸し、何より難波、お前のために命を懸けてくれた仲間のおかげだということを。
We rejoin the gang at the homeless camp. They have Ogasawara bound and gagged, much to the chief's displeasure. Ichi says they couldn't think of anywhere else to take the guy. Like Survive, or their house, or Ichiban Holdings. Man, then we'd really be holding. And I've been holding out on talking about it. We'll get to that later. Also, hey, did we leave Ishioda in that burning building? For now, welcome to the plot 2.0. Much like Yakuza 3's infamous plot dump, we're up for half an hour of unrelenting exposition as Ogasawara runs us through Masato Arakawa's transformation to Ryo Aoki and their shared ascent to power. And in the 10 years since Yakuza 3, RGG have stumbled across an innovation. As in this plot dump, Ichiban takes a smoke break every 10 minutes. So if we do the maths, this trip to the plot dump only takes 90 minutes off Ichiban's life. And yes, it is funny for Ichiban to go, right, bored now, time for honk honk. Back in a jiffy. Jokes aside, this is a welcome feature to break up a lengthy bit of backstory. Ogasawara first met Aoki while the two were studying in America. He was immediately pulled in by Aoki's obvious wealth and power, but quickly came to learn just how little these satisfied him. What Aoki truly craved was frontal power.
力？
表の力とは、つまり人気だ。
To be undeniably respected and have the capability of controlling public figures. So Aoki set his sights on the position of Tokyo governor, a seat described as more meaningful and enviable than even that of prime minister, an objective metric by which it could be said that you've won the people's affections. To that end, he established Bleach Japan, at first inflating its numbers with Arakawa goons and hiring young women to attract feeble-minded gooners.
久米なんかもそれで釣られた口だったな。
Huh. Kumame strikes again. It soon became popular with young people for, as Ogasawara puts it, letting them feel important for not doing much of anything at all. Its proclaimed goals of eradicating corruption and fairness were vague enough for a wide spectrum of naive people to buy into it, while being difficult to present a case against. The group's tactics led to corrupt politicians more or less outing themselves, Aoki quickly bringing them to heel. A move Ogasawara then attempts to use on Ichiban, promising him passage back to the Arakawa should he fold. Ichiban shuts him down by reminding the guy, and probably the audience, that everything he's done so far has been out of avenging Nonomiya, leaving him no impure motive to exploit. If Ichiban's going back to the family, it's on nobody but his terms.
俺らがここまで動いてきた理由ってのは鼻っから損得感情じゃねえ。
簡単にはいかなかったな。次からもっと慎重に言葉選ぶんだな。
Yeah, Too Stupid to Fall really does suit us down to the ground. Man, I talked about forgetting the party's motivations, but it turns out you can forget Ichiban's at times as well. I thought we'd gone beyond Nanomiya. Isn't that bizarre? A great story where we forget why we're doing what we're doing a lot of the time. From there, Aoki generated a lot of media buzz. He was a young, smooth, and charismatic personality who was able to leverage Bleach Japan to leapfrog his way into a strong political career, seeming to leave the group behind, but as we've learned, still riding Ogre's behind. From there, he won entry to the CLP in a landslide, aided by the Arakawa digging up his opponent's every weakness, and I'm sorry, were we the most powerful third-string family in existence? The apparent success of the 3K plan further boosted Aoki's profile, the public caring little that really, all that changed was the pins the Yakuza wore. They only ever saw the success. Few considered it was, at best, a symbolic victory. Meanwhile, the police were only happy for the Omi to arrive, as it filtered out the unpredictable, opportunistic criminals who flooded the city in the Tojo's absence. The last question then is, what's so important about Ijincho? Simply put, it's Ogakubo's home turf. The old man is the one solid obstacle in Aoki's path, the only one who wouldn't budge during his rise to power. He needs to go to feed Aoki's insatiable ego. Aoki, being corrupt himself, had a sense for who else were bleached black, and figured Ogakubo's ascent must be no less slimy than his own. And so that's what this invasion is all about, finding proof of Old Man Ogi's connection to the underworld. Now, I must stop for a moment and say, it is kind of hard to believe that Aoki is the same guy we saw back in 2000. His ambition, sense of social climate, and apparent charisma, well, that's all a far cry from the awkward mess we saw way back when, but I am led to believe that's the point. This moment at the club forced Masato to have a moment of pure self-reflection. He all at once figured he knew how the world saw him, and the question is whether he hates everyone else half as much as he hates himself. The reason I think this is because Ichiban is equally surprised by the young master's turn, especially upon learning Mabuchi's murder plot was signed off on by Masato himself.
荻窪を出し抜くには大きなリスクもやむなしと。ただし、その分リターンは大きいはずだと。
人を殺すのに何も問題ないかよ。
In the end, this only worked because of a stroke of luck. Our investigating the murder, and Nanba's leaking of the operation.
この町もカムロ町と同じ運命さ。
なんだと？
ここもじき近江連合に牛耳られる。もう彼らを止める肉の壁はないんだからな。そうだろ。
The plot 2.0 is very much a refinement, being far better plotted than the plot 1.0, and that's not even considering the presence of breakpoints. Character and theming are far better threaded into what would otherwise be a very dry bit of exposition. The political messaging is especially incisive for the series, going into how groups akin to Bleach use vague yet passionate messaging to stir the naive, the short-sighted, and the little dictators all into its ranks, giving those with full hearts and empty heads nice-sounding but hollow solutions, while supplying an enemy for the cruel to rally against. And the two sides rarely care why the other's there, because they're at the least quite useful. As well as that, its messages exploit the fact that they are to the majority of people totally unassailable. On the surface, everything it stands for is laudable. In an attention-starved economy, you're forced to criticize a group like Bleach on the back foot. Meanwhile, all its heads really care about is their own sway. It's played up and dramatized, obviously, but I think it's a genuinely strong critique of these kind of political movements. Grassroots can grow from rock bottom, but AstroTurf looks real enough to most. Now, having just compressed half an hour of plot into a handful of minutes, I want to pivot for a moment and talk about the never-ending debate of video essays versus video essays which are just plot synopses in disguise. And I promise you, this is still about the game itself. I'm coming back around. I'd say I try to be in the former camp, but that would be a lie, if only because I don't consider what I make video essays. The funny thing is, I've been at this so long, I've seen the same argument play out over the term reviews. I used to call these reviews. Now, I don't really care. What I'm doing is really a hodgepodge of different approaches that I suppose could be called video tour guides. I'm sorry if that seems like a semantic get out of death row card, but I'm trying not to give anyone rope to hang me with. The crux of the matter is, I don't want a label straitjacketing my flexibility. All I want is these videos to be a fun journey and maybe give you something to think about. And I'm going to use any tool that works to get me from A to B. Despite this, I do spend a long time thinking about how we talk about games, how I talk about games, and the craft of doing so. How do I make it fun? How do I refine my own appreciation? And how can I better get my thoughts across? And I do try and keep abreast of what people are saying, even if the synopsis argument tends to be pretty cyclical. It flares up, a creator or two gets shit on, everyone gets bored and moves on to the next cyclical argument until another long video flares it up again. Maybe I'll get the pleasure this time. This is going to be a long video. It's been a minute since we've had video game difficulty. Can we run that Crucible again? Holy shit, it actually happened while I was narrating. Watch this not be relevant when this video goes up. I do synopsize, but I am making an effort to match or exceed that with actually trying to dig deeper, and I see synopsis as a reminder for people who've played the game and necessary info for those who are never going to bother, while acting as a launchpad for talking points and jokes. I try and make the videos worthwhile and not just suck the game dry like a content vampire. The struggle is how to best compress information without losing definition or maliciously muddying the game's intent in the process. And with Yakuza 7, this is especially tricky because this game is lean. The more moving pieces, the easier it is for something to break. That's true of both mechanics and the mechanics of storytelling. So the difficulty I'm having trying to keep this video in any way sharp is to me a sign of how this game's ambitions which rival the Young Masters, do not exceed its grasp. Very little feels extraneous, and what does feels very little indeed. The plot 2.0 is a break in the action, but it's well placed after the exciting torching of Gomajul. It's a chance to calm down and catch your breath, but even that doesn't mean the reveals have to stop. And neither does Bleach. Having finally tracked down Ogasawara, the camp is raided and the man is lost in the mayhem.
今度人をさらうときは俺の目の届かないとこでやってくれ。わかりました。そんなのもう二度としませんよ。多分。
Ichiban lives an unpredictable life, Chief. Oh look, life's calling again. The Seiryu have put down their internal rebellion, but Cho can't be reached. So Ichiban is off to check in. Son-hee loans out Han, and the gang once again reaffirms their shared goal. But before we can go, Nanba returns once again. This time appearing flippant, dismissive, telling Ichiban, don't bother risking anything more for the sake of the Ijin 3.
心配してくれてんのか。お前のお人よし加減に呆れてんだ。そんなんだから、俺みてえのにまで利用されちまうんだ。利用される？そんな風に思っちゃいねえよ。
Again, his new facade breaks, just as much as this town has broken him. Nanba's only tactic left is to plain beg Ichiban to be selfish, which naturally was never going to work. Much like Nanba was only here for his brother, now Ichiban is in the same position, which makes for a smooth changeover. And as hard as Nanba tries, Ichiban isn't going to allow the guy to leave on bad terms. It's a we're not so different speech which actually works for me.
バも俺も足立さんもさっちゃんもみんな本当のことを知りたくてその気持ちに素直に生きてる人間なんだ。この嘘だらけの世の中に流されないで本当のことを知りたい、そういう人間の集まりなんだなって思うんだよ。だろ？もういいよ、そういうのは。じゃあ俺は行くぜ。そっか。でもさよならは言わねえぜ。またどっかで会えるはずだしさ。それに呼んでくれたら俺らもすぐ駆けつけるし。せいぜい達者でやってくれ。
It's a bit lame how to get to Qing Jin, Cho's home base and restaurant. We have to essentially play through the same dungeon again. What we did before was only one half of the full sequence. But once inside, we find the staff are ready to serve. Their new master. And man, the music that plays here makes up for that repetition. This is Kung Funk. I guess Ichiban's imagination has taken him to old martial arts movies, and this track is nostalgic in ways beyond that. It gives me a Yakuza 4 vibe, which I think means it's time to talk about the music. As usual for Yakuza, it's banger after banger, nothing out of the ordinary there. But the reason this track gets me thinking is because of how unique it is when taking all of 7 into account. I loved how varied the soundtracks of 4, 5, and 0 could be, and I find 7 lacking in this regard. It has undeniable character, and these are still very much beats to beat down to, but the soundscape is far less broad. Ichiban's sound is defined by techno. I apologise for the vague term, but I am not the best with musical genres. While Kiryu wasn't averse to synths, his sound was mostly characterised by distorted guitars with a heavy rock emphasis. Ichi's techno focus is great. It fits his role as a more modern hero, and it pays homage to his love of games. The Substory boss music, Back Scratcher of Coins, is even a remix of Dragon Quest V's battle theme, while also incorporating Aria of the Soul from Persona. I'd ask where Ichiban found time to become a fan of that series too, but hey, like most of them, he probably never played the games. There's another way this dungeon's nostalgic. We face off against the tiger, drop it, and we're up and before Mabuchi. This is such a cool shot. The framing tells you everything you need to know. For all Mabuchi's ambitions of being the Arakawa of Ijincho, the Omi Alliance were never going to see him as an equal.
Yo, わしらも手貸そうか、マブちゃん。いえ、結構です、石尾田さん。我々も安く見られるわけにはね。あなた方とはあくまで五分で杯交わさせてもらいたいと思ってますんで。
And so we rematch with Mabuchi. And hey, since we're on music, I actually have something I was holding out on last time. His theme, Warmaker, it's about 10 times cooler than he is. I love the war horns blaring. And there was a period before we got official track names where channels uploading these songs had to think up their own names, and the one they picked for this was Cold Blooded. Does this sound cold-blooded to you? This track is as fire as the blood flowing through Mabuchi's veins. What's really cool is with the electronic sounds representing Ichiban and the gang, the boss themes often play out like a battle, with Ichiban's sound fighting against the bosses. Warmaker sounds like Ichiban trying to silence Mabuchi's war horns before he summons conflict to Ijincho. Sawashiro's theme has guitars reminiscent of Kiryu's, representing him as being old world Yakuza. Ishioda's sirens shout, "Caution! Heavy machinery." Even Han reprising his already techno-focused Theory of Beauty makes it apparent he'll eventually slot into the Ichiban as a party member. The use of boss music remains strong, and Ichiban having a defined sound allows the boss tracks to have an extra narrative layer, a battle of the Ichibans. Ichiban is so cool. Not that these guys believe it. It's in here we get a look at Arakawa's third lieutenant, the absolute titan Tendo.
ふらついとる下級ランカーとチャンピオンが同じリングに上がれるかいな。
A former heavyweight boxer who killed a man in the ring, joining the Yakuza for the thrill of the fight. And he's happy to leave Ichiban for later.
俺らを見逃したこと後で後悔するぜ。
ほう。そいつは楽しみや。
Ishioda, meanwhile, doesn't want to wait. The group is winded, hoping Han can bring forth a miracle. Tendo may have just butt out, but the bum is in.
私に頼らずとも。お前。
だから無茶しすぎなんだよお前は。もうお前らと一緒に面倒に巻き込まれるのはごめんだと思ったけどよ。
Sometimes all I think I need to say about a scene is it brings a smile to my face. Nanba affirms his loyalty to the group, and we get our third boss fight against Ishioda. I kind of feel bad for him. He goes from wrecking ball to fighting alongside a wreck to just plain getting wrecked. As to make up for his betrayal, and likely inspired by the Gomajul fire, Nanba gets the one and only story-mandated super move. And as we all know, Yakuza are weak to heat. With Ishioda down for the count, Nanba's return to the group is made official. I've seen this moment and many like it get flack here and there. There is something I find a little bleak about how the scenes of Ichiban I've seen the most people take issue with tend to be his moments of forgiveness. With the greater the effort, the greater the pushback. This is amplified here by people feeling personally slighted by Nanba's betrayal and not wanting to give him the same leeway that Ichiban does. But then you have to remember his core trait of seeing and believing the best in people and working to bring that better nature out. While exaggerated, especially in Infinite Wealth if we get there, it's one of the most admirable, inspiring traits of his character. And I often felt his forgiveness was well motivated without requiring anything more than basic scrutiny. What I like about this twist is on a replay you do look at Nanba's actions in a new light. You start questioning how self-serving he is, and it's easy to realise he often displays kindness without any clear benefit for doing so. Does it add a dark undertone to one of the cheeriest scenes in the game? Yes, but it doesn't ruin it for me, just adds a bit more depth to it. Remember what I said earlier, Ichiban always looks for the best intentions in good deeds. No excuse excusing kindness. Nanba's first instinct when he was caught was to beg for Ichiban's life. In his every appearance thereafter, he's acting like a dick, and it's clearly acting. He's trying different approaches to get Ichiban to stop interfering, and I do believe this is at least somewhat out of genuine concern for Ichiban now Nanba knows what he's up against. If he truly didn't care about Ichiban, he wouldn't have come here to try and talk him out of further endangering himself.
俺は仲間なんかじゃねえよ。
If there is a problem, yeah, Nanba did kind of ruin everything. I buy Ichiban's forgiveness. The rest of the Ijin 3, not so much. No matter how much the game has revealed that behind the curtain they're actually well-intentioned, they're overlooking a pretty big indiscretion here. The game kinda just sneakily ignores the amount of damage Nanba has caused, which isn't very slick given how we were very bluntly told what the damage would be, and then shown what it was. It does this because, spoilers, on a long enough timeline this works out for the town, but obviously the characters can't know that, and it's not like this gets fixed due to Nanba redoubling his efforts to make up for it. That complaint I do get. The Nanba's brother plotline is also paper thin, serving more to establish a parallel between Ichiban and Aoki and how they treat their subordinates. I do believe the Masato connection is a big part of what finally pushes Nanba into coming back, returning the favour for Ichiban unknowingly helping him with his own fraternal fracas. And that I do find really sweet. Him finally asking if he could still be called a friend is the cherry on top after his vehement rejection of the label.
こんな俺を仲間だってまだ呼んでくれんのか。
That shit hits for me, man. I love this group.
しょうがねえ連中だな。
おお、ずいぶん上からじゃねえか。
マジでマジでしょうがねえ連中だよ。
相変わらず素直じゃねえな。
うるせえよ。
You know, a lot of these videos is just fighting the urge to let certain cutscenes run because you may as well watch a long play in that regard. But I love this stuff.
おかえり、なんちゃん。
With that done, there's a handful of loose ends the game needs to tidy up before we start transitioning into the story's final act. In a bit more moral laundering, Nanba's grudge with Gomajul is put to rest, as his brother was not only treated as an esteemed guest, but he met the woman he intends to marry while in captivity. Which is absurd, but sure. We never meet this man, by the way. And oh yeah, there's Cho, the man we were here to save. Well, he was rescued off screen by an old friend. One who wants to see Ichiban. We're brought face to face with... Wait, who are you?
お久しぶりです、兄貴。
I'm just kidding. It's Mitsu. Ichiban's overjoyed to see him, but Mitsu is reserved. The situation doesn't allow him to share in Ichiban's glee, and the only way out playing lets us know this is a less than ideal reunion. He has just one thing he needs to share.
荒川のおやつさんはそう遠くないうちにある博打を打ちます。その時には一人でも多くの味方が必要になります。
And so we leave, once again forgetting Ishioda. I mean, at least this time the building wasn't on fire. Ichiban asks Cho the big question. What happens to the Lumang? Cho says he's going to stand down. The point of the Lumang is to provide a home for its men, so his last act is to merge with Gomijul, putting them under Son Hee's leadership. With the wall crumbling and the threat of war, they've got ample reason to put grudges aside and have each other's backs.
あんたは自分の部下だけじゃなくコミジュルの連中も助けてやりたいんだろ。
春日君ってさ、野暮なことまで全部口にしちゃうのな。
Yeah, Ichiban, don't go making him look good.
だからやめろって。
Reminded of the bill, Ichiban figures it's time to go collect a debt. First time for everything after all. Sawashiro would be pissed. So we start digging into the truth of Ichiban's arrival in Ijincho. Nanba, having his own suspicions, takes us back to the homeless camp. The chief explains they've long had a deal with the Arakawa, with the bums handling body disposal for the hit-happy family. Within that was a secret clause, however. If anyone brought to them were merely wounded, they were to be treated and released, their survival kept secret. Ichiban has up until now been desperately clinging to his leftover loyalty for Arakawa, an area where the rest of the gang have been treating him with kid gloves, but this makes Ichiban truly want to believe Arakawa's shot not to end, but save his life, with his last words landing closer to his heart than the bullet.
死んでくれ。頼んだぞ、イチ。
From Hoshino we learn even more. The bill could have only come from Arakawa, a symbolic letter of introduction. The old man explains that soon after the counterfeiting operation started, the Ijin 3 needed smugglers. One such man was travelling actor Toshio Arakawa. When his wife stole a large sum of fake bills, Toshio was to be made an example of, a hit which fell to a young Hoshino, who only learned of Masumi's presence when it was far too late to back out. The troop disbanded not long after and Masumi fell in with the Yakuza, acting as a hitman for the Hikawa, using the hobo's body disposal to travel to Yokohama and investigate his father's killer. Eventually, he found his man. When Hoshino received an undisguised invitation to meet, he had no intention of fleeing. He was ready to explain why Masumi's father died and face death over the matter.
あの時の子供に殺されるのならいくらかマシなんじゃねえかってな。
But after hearing him out, Masumi simply got up to leave.
そのまま出て行こうとする荒川を俺は引き止めた。復讐しに来たんじゃねえのかってな。
で、おやさんは
あんたがふてぶてしく俺の正体を無視してくれりゃ背中から撃てたのにな、そう言って。
That goes fucking hard, man. And I love the wealth of emotions captured in that. As much as Arakawa hates it, he does forgive or at least understand Hoshino. He can no longer go through with vengeance and be at peace with himself over it, a thread which will soon tie Ichiban back to him even tighter. When Arakawa started his own family, Hoshino sent over a fresh batch of defective bills, metaphorically placing his life once again in Masumi's hands. The money that his mother stole and in turn took his father's life, which Hoshino gave him so he could end his at any moment, Masumi instead uses to buy Ichiban's. As both a literal and thematic object, the game makes such ironically clean use of dirty money. Hoshino assures Ichiban Masumi couldn't have shot to kill. He shot to save.
荒川真澄にとって大切な身内だということだ。
おやさんが俺を大切な身内だと。おやさんを信じなきゃいけねえって改めて思いました。
He wanted him to find Hoshino. A side note of this scene, it feels redundant to say a relationship in this game is heartwarming, but I forgot just how much I like the bond Ichiban develops with Hoshino as yet another father figure, as well as a friend he trusts just as much as his gang. Hoshino genuinely wonders just how deep the familial bond between Ichi and Masumi goes, and he envies how Masumi inspired such a good-hearted and loyal soldier. And now we know of him, we also see the machinations of Masumi's other son. Aoki is pushing to dissolve parliament and instate him as party chair, or else Aoki leaks the truth of Ogakubo. The PM tries in vain to resist, but Aoki simply holds all the cards.
何より年齢が若すぎる。
なら私を止められる年寄りを連れてくればいい。もちろん、そういう人がいればの話ですが。
The Prime Minister? Blown the fuck out. 3 years ahead of schedule. He then goes to visit a sickly Ogakubo, gloating about taking it all from him and promising to lead a new era of politics.
都知事が幹事長を兼任するなど聞いたこともない。
あなた方老人にとって この先起こることは全てが前代未聞の出来事になるでしょう。
This is before Aoki literally and figuratively lowers himself to explain what this is really all about.
どんな気分ですか？現実を知らない子供たちに全てを持っていかれるのは。
A great deal of Aoki's animosity isn't just because this man was an obstacle. This came about from the old man once slighting Aoki by calling him and Bleach idealistic children. This moment wonderfully and ironically revealing just how childish the man still is, as he taunts this old-timer over what turns out to be a half-true assessment. Idealistic? No. Childish. Baby, this is kindergarten. There's the Masato I knew. Beneath that veil of charisma remains a deeply broken, easily wounded kid. Ogakubo's heart rate rises as Aoki tells him he's going to dismantle the grey zones and leave all who depend on them with nothing.
グレーゾーンに甘え続けた彼らの責任では？自己責任の果てに行く当てを失った人間などゴミ以下ですよ。どうなろうが私の知ったことではありません。おっと、長話が過ぎましたか。元幹事長、ぜひ長生きしてくださいよ。私は心からそう思っているんですから。
Before we move on to Act 3, I've got to talk about the two issues with this game's pacing, and it's in how late we get our last two party members, Han joining in Chapter 10 and Zhao at the start of the third act, Chapter 11. These two are now shacking up with us at Survive.
ハン・ジュンギから止めてくれなんて頼まれたら、俺の立場的にも断れねえだろ。
Buddy, you're the reason his house set on fire. I don't think he's gonna heat up your sheets. In battle, they're both focused high damage dealers. Because the core four so perfectly cover each other, these two may feel a little superfluous. But that's actually what's so interesting about them. You're trading off coverage and utility for sheer power. And man, it's some power. Perhaps Han isn't wrong to be so headstrong. And that's thanks to everyone's favourite move. Head Trauma is a head scratcher. A super low MP ability which for reasons unknown has double base damage calculation, making it one of the most powerful attacks in the game. It's a dirt cheap dirt nap dealer. And Zhao's good too. He's not broken, but he's good. The pacing of content can wind up really working against these lads. They arrive at a point in the game long after a majority of optional content has been made available, meaning the player may have exhausted or grown exhausted of a majority of what there is to do, giving these two even less overall time in the party and a greatly diminished presence overall, which is worsened by them being absent from a great many group cutscenes beyond this point. As such, they never quite manage to entwine themselves with the party. My usual playstyle with these games is to do content as it comes, and when I start, I ain't stopping till it's done or I'm done. I'll be the first to admit this is not the best approach, as it makes a great many Yakuza entries feel incredibly front-loaded. I believe the more intended experience is to follow your nose and bounce from one diversion to another, but that's never quite been how I do things, and in this instance, it wound up really biting me. My first time playing this game, I skipped the two's drink links, something I made certain to rectify on this playthrough. This time I made sure to leave myself things to do, so I had things to do with these two Johnny-come-latelys. And even then I had to blow a lot of money on the cabaret club to get these two sourced and ready to talk, having to drink with them in order to drink link with them later. You gotta live a little, even if the liver will be a little less lively down the line. Having now seen these drink links through, I'm sorry to have missed them, as they wound up being my favourites of the bunch. And they are best played as the last two in the set. The way they relate to Ichiban and each other provide fantastic parallels and builds on the conflict of nature versus nurture we see between Ichiban and Masato. Han Joon-Gi, real name Yeon-Soo Kim, was turned into a body double by his father. This was done without Kim's consent or the real deal's knowledge. He was then offered up to Han just so Dad could ascend the Jingwon ladder. The real Han seemed genuinely disturbed by this, but accepted the gesture and wound up treating his double well. Han reflects on Han quite positively. It's an unexpected and weirdly humanizing reveal. There's something really crafty in the idea that even in 6, we never saw the real Han. And now we're getting very guarded snippets of the man from his fake, who's trying to conduct himself based on what he knew, while preserving his legacy, while also occasionally letting little bits of himself show as he opens up to us. He's a literally layered character, one which could easily fall into being jumbled or clunky, but actually comes across as rather effortless and believable. I love that no matter what, even when trying to be natural, even this Han is almost accidentally flashy and suave. A switch he can't turn off, assuming he even wants to. In an interview, Yokoyama said that if the Jingwon were back, Han Joon-Gi would have to be there, and having a body double of their leader felt in character for the group. It's surprising because reading about it in the abstract, well, it sounds simultaneously barbaric, yet pandering. Especially since, while I didn't mind Han Joon-Gi, I'm nowhere near as smitten with him as some fans were. The very idea of him returning sounds desperately contrived, which makes it all the more surprising that the result is this sympathetic and surprisingly nuanced, working in tandem with the themes of the narrative and the new tone Ichiban brings. The question of why he chooses to remain as Joon-Gi is the central arc of his drink link, and the answer is a happier ending for the Jingwon than I'd have thought possible. When he learns some older hands are hunting him for failing to save the boss, Han draws them into the open not to eliminate the threat, but to invite them to a new home among the Go-Majul. At this point, they're all long-forgotten castaways from the mainland mafia, further estranged for their failures in 2006 and 2016. Time is doing a better job destroying the Tojo than they ever did, and the time for revenge has passed. So what does this Han do? He beats permission to let go into them. The real Joon-Gi had to put up with a legacy that was handed to him. His body double can do more for who's left by finally cleaning their hands of it. He opts to remain as Han Joon-Gi in the hopes that the Jingwon's last dark secret can instead be their guiding light. It's such a hopeful note to possibly end this group's long, bloody history on. I say possibly because I can't tell with this series anymore. I'll just say, I hope it is, because that's a very nice note for them to end on. If Ichiban is to be a catalyst for change in the series, and if 6 had the theme of the old stepping aside for the new, I'm okay with the series embracing a more optimistic direction, with a younger cast who can bring with them new solutions the older generation couldn't conceive of. In this case, putting a bloody past behind as best one can, and working towards not just a better future, but the hope of a future at all. It's sappy, but the game makes it work really well, and it doesn't do this weightlessly. And I love the irony that as much as Han Joon-Gi wants to carry the torch of the original, he just can't help but be his own Han. Meanwhile, Cho, who I just didn't care much for the first time around, wound up becoming just as well realised as the rest of the lads, genuinely let down by a lack of mandatory screen time. He and Ichiban have a more bantery rapport. Cho likes to crack jokes and mess with people. It's a shtick that could be annoying and shallow, and I definitely mistook it for such the first time around, thinking him nothing more than a hollow jokester. What's great is he actually is, but only on the surface.
難波にはすでに刺客を放ってある。
なんだって？刺客って誰だ？
はーい、うちが引き受けました。
He's introduced as callously indifferent, and as he joins us at Survive, he doesn't stop joking, acting exactly the same whether it's a whiskey or a weapon in his hand. But as Ichiban starts matching him jab for jab, the tension melts away.
でも俺は脱いだらすごいぜ。どうする？今ここで見せようか？
脱いだらすごいのは俺もだよ。でも二人して今脱いだら店に迷惑だろ。
We learn he was born and bred to be leader of the Lumang. As a kid, he was exceptionally talented at whatever he set his mind to. He could have been whatever he wanted, but he was destined from birth to be a crime lord. It's as you get to know Cho, his joking takes on an air of him distancing himself from the violence he was born into, from the life he never had any say, much less stock in. He's not a monster, but he had to look like one. And while he never stops joking, he does at least become jovial.
それじゃあ、お前があいつに力をつけさせちまった張本人か？
ああ、なるほど。確かにそうなるね。
His drink link ends by tying up a plot point left truly unresolved by the story, confronting a now disgraced Mabuchi, who still imagines he can take Ijincho's reins with just one more push. It's the one time Cho drops his mask and is openly emotional, letting a shocked Mabuchi know just how furious he is. It's an anger born of worry and regret.
いい加減にしろよ！今までお前が見逃されてたのは、孫妃が俺の気持ちを汲んでくれていたからだ。俺がお前を殺したくねえっていう気持ちをな！マムシ！お前は俺を嫌いだろ！俺もお前のが大嫌いだ！だけどよ、どんだけ嫌いでも、どんだけ腐っても、やっぱりお前は俺の仲間なんだよ。俺はよ、仲間を殺したくねえんだよ。お前に死んでほしくねえんだよ。
Cho was betrayed over a position which stole any chance he had at a normal life. A role he never really cared about, but had to try his best at anyway for the people who depended on him. In the end, his best friend turned on him over something he never wanted. Something only Cho could know is so empty. He'd have likely gladly handed the reins over to Mabuchi were it an option. I really like these two stories, both for doing a great job adding dimensions to these two latecomers, but also for how well they tie back into Ichiban. All three are characters whose fathers set the course of their lives for them. None chose a life of crime. It chose them and they had to make do. Now their reasons for staying in that world are gone, and for the first time in their lives, they have to decide who they're going to be. These drink links do that while at the same time giving us a preview of the conflicts ahead and how Ichiban might navigate them. Just as much as Chapter 11, these move us into the late game conflicts. Part of me wishes this stuff was in some way integrated into the main plot, but knows that it's probably for the best being optional content. All of this adds so many extra dimensions and considerations to the primary theme, but were it all mandatory, we'd wind up in a Yakuza 5 situation where the main plot becomes messy and contrived because it's unable to ignore a heartfelt tangent or thematic reincorporation. That is what I love about 5, how it looks at its central theme from every angle. A feat 7 does actually repeat, albeit much more cleanly. This is a much tighter narrative because it knows how to show restraint, and Drink Links winds up a clever way to let it have its shot and chase it too. It's probably best where it is for giving me a little something to stew on without throwing too much into the pot. Oh yeah, the final karaoke track. Well, it was written when Hori was once eating a stew and was really irritated for some reason. Yeah, I'm sure we can all relate. God, wait until next game for me to discover I've somehow undersold that track like I did Like a Butterfly. The second act of Yakuza 7, chapters 6 to 10, is maybe one of the longest unbroken chain of reveals, twists, and upsets in the series, and it's so much fun. While the openings, multiple, do a great job getting me invested in the characters and setting, giving me a supposed understanding of the world around us, this second leg tosses it into a washing machine. It's such a ballsy story to set up such a complex yet intriguing situation, and then not rest on it for any longer than it needs to make its points, tearing it down as quickly as we come to understand it. I realised I had no time to cleanly stop and talk about Yokohama itself without feeling like I was rudely interrupting the narrative. But it's time to hit the brakes and finally tour the town we just ruined. Another parallel between Kiryu and Ichiban is Kiryu was born in Yokohama before moving to Kamurocho, while Ichi is the exact opposite. And that's a pure coincidence, absolutely nothing to do with why they chose Yokohama. So why did they? The practical reason is it needed to be close enough to Kamurocho that a wounded Ichiban wouldn't die in transit. Initially, the team had set their sights on the Kamata district of Tokyo, as it had long been Seiga's favourite drinking spot, but it was dropped for the rather depressing reason that it lacked landmarks. Yeah, get your shit together, Kamata. It's then Yokoyama remembered living in Yokohama, and realised how well it worked for the story he had in mind. I think his old apartment is somewhere around here. He settled on Hinodecho, Sakuragi-cho, and Izazaki-cho, resulting in a map 3 times larger than the old Kamurocho. Director Ryusuke Hori explains, "We'd wanted to create a town of contrasts, with clear differences between rich and poor, light and dark. And Yokohama is a great setting for that. You have that beautiful night view of the harbour lights spread out before you, symbolising the rich. And then you have the poor, the people who can't go there, who live in this world behind the wall of muscle." The much larger map size is only the first of many things which sets Yokohama apart. It follows an entirely new design philosophy both literally and in intent. Befitting the game's more fantastical nature, RGG broke from their approach of utterly faithful recreation. Yokoyama's Yokohama is not the town you'd see were you to visit in 2019. It's instead an amalgam of the modern town and years-old memories. A place out of time, based on the old streets and shady diners he recalled from his time there. This more impressionistic approach has another facet. Motivated by the game's heavier commentary and sympathetic depiction of red light districts, it led to RGG not pursuing any real-world tie-ins, for fear that brand deals might lead to them having to compromise the depiction of the town, or water down the message of the story. This could be part of why the licensing deal with Don Quixote wasn't renewed. It's genuinely surprising. Using real-world places and products to make the setting feel more real has been a long-standing series staple, but this time it's more rise up, less rise up. Even without the product placement, the feeling of fidelity to a real place is very much still intact, and this act of less strictly adhering to reality likely helped in compressing this much larger area into a space which remains interesting to explore. There is a not unfounded worry that the town's greater size could lead to a loss of the tight, condensed personality many prior hubs had. While there are pockets which feel superfluous, I kinda find that charming in and of itself. I know it sounds weird to be thrilled by a boring street, but in Yakuza, that in itself is kinda novel, and even these seemingly redundant roads host details that make them feel lived in or meaningful to someone. Instead of being a large, featureless town, it's more like a collection of miniature districts, arranged remarkably well to act as part of a greater whole. Each has 1 or 2 unique features or landmarks to stick in your memory, and it means even before you're told, this place feels storied. There's history and life programmed into these streets. It doesn't matter that it's a bigger city, because they haven't forgotten the small details which make the place. From the welcoming liveliness of the homeless camp, the cozy bends of the bar district funneling me to survive, the energetic throng of Isazaki Road where fights seem almost unavoidable. I adore how Jinai Station bisects and signals the north-south divide of the city. From here, the roads grow more open and the buildings taller. It's less claustrophobic, but also impersonal, with Hamakita Park at the top acting as a wild frontier, boasting an abundance of rare crafting items and dangerous foes. I find that such a cute little flourish, using a park as a frontier. It's very exciting. Going back to Hori noting the divide between rich and poor, this is achieved via a north-south divide in simple but elegant fashion. As the saying goes, the higher the latitude, the stronger the attitude, with both affluence and difficulty rising the further north you go. What Yokohama achieves feels like an advancement of Yakuza 3's Ryukyu, and especially 6's Onomichi, but expanded and built with JRPG concerns in mind. It's made up of distinct zones and each has its own vibe. At a glance, I can tell where in the city I am from the road layout, architecture, and the kind of people I see milling about. The city is tightly compressed, but it's so well laid out, with each area possessing such well-considered checkpoints and passages that it never feels artificial. It flows from spot to spot. Each area feels as big as it needs to sell its scale. Like so much of Yakuza, this city is greater than the sum of its parts. Navigation feels natural and intuitive, but distinct to each area of the city, every spot having its own rules to figure out and features to exploit in your hunt for goodies or getting out of dodge. What I especially like is how a majority of places which come to be meaningful to Ichiban and gang are all situated on the southern end of the map, and we're often reset here. This makes it homely. It ingratiates us with the grey zones mechanically, just as Ichiban feels his connection narratively, with excursions into the less welcoming north becoming more common, not to mention deeper as the story progresses. This allows the story to travel, shining spotlights on different areas as events proceed and making sure things never feel static, while never keeping us too far from a safe, welcoming place to retreat to when we want to catch our breath. Prior stories had to work within their limited spaces, and claustrophobia could be felt at times. Here, no such issue. In earlier titles, a trek across town was a small prospect, only requiring combat and maybe one kind of collectible to give such short jaunts some friction. To accommodate for the larger map, 7 has massively increased the amount of micro-content, as well as given the player unlimited sprint. It is something fun to do. You've got 3 speeds: walking, jogging, and sprinting. But women, for whatever reason, can only walk or sprint, and if you jog, they go. So you can force them to repeatedly bump into you, or else launch them like missiles. Look at her go. And well, that's the least of many things to do. The content is thinner, but the increased density of things to do in transit staves off tedium and lends meaning to exploration. This micro-content comes in many flavours. The first collectible is actually a repurposed series staple. You now need to track down and activate taxi stats. Unlike prior cities where prior protagonists had prior knowledge of the town, this little change tasks you with figuring out Yokohama in tandem with Ichiban. The player first needs to get the lay of the land on foot, making the taxi function as both a relief and a reward. If you're of a weird mindset where quick travel feels a bit of a cheat, having earned it first goes a long way into hushing those mind goblins. I mentioned party chats a while back. These are so much fun to stumble into. They not only build on the party, they add immediate character to the city and draw your eyes to its details without shoving them down your throat. They are remarkably charming little skits which allow characters to talk about anything, and I do mean anything, and solidify how explosive this group's chemistry is. What's so remarkable about Kamurocho is that by now, each and every street has at least one memorable event taking place on it over years of stories and sub-stories. If these streets could talk, they'd probably never shut up. I'd love a map of Kamurocho listing every event, main or otherwise, by road. I think it would take an age to fill up. Another thing party chats achieve is getting a jumpstart on this process, creating a ton of little memories which are tied to certain areas. These are good by themselves, but naturally, they also build bond to progress drink links. And we don't just drink with friends, we now also dine with them. I'd say eateries no longer offer experience, but I'd be lying. EXP has been replaced with dining experiences. Table talks are further skits alongside party chats, where you get a bit of food trivia, party food preferences, and occasional food quizzes. These really take off when Cho joins the party. More than any old completion bonus, party chats and table talks had me looking high and low for that next tasty morsel of character detail, which is much easier given the party can now swallow the menu whole. We no longer need damage to fix or stomachs to be empty. By the time you're done with party chats and table talks, the characters all feel so fully realised, and probably just plain full from all the food I forced down them. Gonna have to walk some of that off, which only leads to more chats.
結構歩いたな。
最近ちょっと痩せようかと思ってたからちょうどいいぜ。
The placement of shops and restaurants has taken on a far more gamey design. Following JRPG logic, they're now treated the same way inns would be in a fantasy setting, spaced much further apart. This is intended to give travel more considerations and consequences, as the player has to go longer without access to healing. Though given the low difficulty, this rarely if ever landed for me outside of one exception, which required a lot of imagination on my part. This further sets Yokohama apart from prior towns. It's less bustling and convenient, and this makes it so that returning to Kamurocho does feel like going to the big city. And there's so much more besides. We talked about treasure hunting, which I'm still doing by this point in the game. Well, there's also hidden containers and secondary currencies hidden away to give purpose to nooks and crannies, and then there's bespoke enemies and honkonks, so you can deal with some crooks and nannies. Each area has unique Sujimon to hunt, further adding character to each locale via its local characters. I will say one annoying part of travel is that since the Sujimon live in Ijincho, their eyesight hasn't been cooked by the neon glare of Kamurocho, and as such, these buggers can see you and trigger fights from miles away. It's a concession for the much larger map, but I can't pretend it isn't frustrating. Overall, while much of this is filler content, it feels measured, and fulfills the purpose of giving you a lot of little things to do while traversing this much larger map. It doesn't feel like cynical padding, just a way to add fun to cyclical plodding. It's a lot of little stuff to keep you occupied and keep the much longer travel times from creating a feeling of empty space. Breadcrumbing rewards for the various mechanics like bonds and crafting. And a ton of little side activities remain. As ever, there is so much to do off the beaten path. Gambling games return, but they're now hidden behind personality checks, which is an awesome use of the system. You gotta be cool enough to join. I wish there was more stuff like this hidden around the city, which makes you feel like you're really becoming part of the place and getting to be in the know. You can play baseball and even golf. Darts are now a party activity, with your party acting as the difficulty selection, which is a really cute touch, and again, this raises your bond level. Something fascinating about RGG is how much their departments overlap. Everyone knows at least a little of what everyone else is doing. I can't help but feel this developmental synergy is why the games possess such an interwoven nature, with every element feeding all others. There is another facet to this. In 2017, Ryosuke Hori talked about his feelings that to be competitive, console games require 3 things: spectacle, challenges, and volume. This is to compete with modern shorter attention spans which mobile games naturally feed on. Saying, with apps, you can try it for a bit, be, nah, bored now, let's do this, and straight away try something else. But with a game, you can't switch off quickly, because it's made on the assumption that you'll continue for a certain amount of time. You've got a problem, and that's why there has to be a way of switching channels, as it were, within the same game. A lot of praise is heaped on Yakuza for its breadth of offerings, for its play spots. For me, what's been so gripping about Yakuza's side content is how it's always worked as part of a large tapestry, in how it bolsters the main scenario in ways both mechanical and narrative, as well as its broader power of adding depth to the setting and excitement to exploration. Each Yakuza game is a Rubik's Cube for the players to puzzle out. There are so many games where I can beat dudes up. There are games where beating dudes up is more mechanically involved and exhilarating. But only in Yakuza can I be doing it to get some gambling money, to win big at blackjack, to buy some crafting materials, to get those made into a new weapon, to then go and beat up even tougher dudes. To me, that's the thrill. All of these elements working as part of one big harmonious system. And on top of that, they're often fun by themselves. The last thing which ties this all together is the part-time hero system. Now, I'm not all that fond of part-time hero, but I wouldn't give it a big fat 0. It's a less troubling version of Troubler and a complete recontextualization of the completion menu. Just like the plot of Yakuza 0, a little framing goes a long way. This simple change did make completion goals a lot more compulsive by framing it as an in-universe game of sorts. And it feeding personality points is a nice and sensible reward. It's that little bit of extrinsic motivation to sweeten the deal. There was a funny moment when Part-Time Hero unlocked mid-party chat, meaning I was suddenly flooded with tons of completion rewards. Yeah, sorry Adachi. I can't hear you over Ichiban having a sudden personality influx. I think he watched American Psycho last night. Just as Troubler gave us mini missions, stuff that would be too small scale for a sub-story but takes a bit more storytelling than a random encounter, the 2 part-time hero categories are support and rescue missions. Supports are fetch quests and hidden object hunts, while rescues are mini-bosses and, more annoyingly, takedown requests, which is hunting down specific enemy types. So if you wanted to add grind to your grind, go grind away, hero boy. Go run in circles for half an hour to barely take down half of the kind of guy you want. I'll admit to throwing in the towel here. I'm a hero, not a street sweeper. While support missions are more or less fluff, I do think the menus are valuable. There are a ton of random items in 7, and by encouraging you to gather a mix of common, rare, and utterly unique items, it lets the player in on these things even existing, which prompts curiosity to go figure out where to find them. It's an ever-cycling game-long treasure hunt, and I find that really useful. Part-Time Hero's greatest strength is in how it guides the player by giving them questions. Tracking down missing people leads you to really scrutinizing the map and finding hidden passages. Meanwhile, the man who can't stop shitting led me to every restroom on the map. And in doing so, I stumbled onto several other discoveries along the way. I was led by the nose, and not just because my objectives stank. It's thanks to him I found the restroom casino and really flushed my money down the toilet. While the part of me who hates checklists doesn't enjoy engaging with Part-Time Hero, it's an undeniably elegant checklist. Well contextualized and makes itself feel necessary for the larger scope of the game. It also doesn't call you every 5 seconds, which is a pretty big bonus. Though I will confess, I did pussy out finding all the cats again. The second time I was asked. And while we're being a part-time hero, we should probably stop and talk about who we're being a hero for. The men, women, and utter weirdos of Yokohama. Much of the fun of Substories up to this point was the world taking a pickaxe to the ever stone-faced Kiryu. Obviously there were Substories from many emotional flavours. The funny, the heartfelt, the thriller, as many colours as the rainbow. Regardless, it allowed us to see a whole other side of his character by putting him in situations you wouldn't normally find him in and showing how he'd respond. With Ichiban, who as I mentioned feels like a Substory character thrust into centre stage, this dynamic winds up inverted. It's far less surprising for him to get involved in the low-stakes zaniness Substories often feature. He's far more extroverted, not to mention proactive than the reactive Kiryu, often taking it upon himself to figure out solutions to problems and step in even before he's explicitly asked. Instead of revealing a hidden side to him, because little of Ichiban is hidden, it's more adding dimensions to what we already know of him and reaffirming just how deep his well of kindness runs. We've had other playable characters with Substories before, but since these were bit players, these diversions would zero in on their gimmick. Akiyama had applicants, Haruka had idle conundrums, Shinada had balls, and so on. But Ichiban isn't a bit player, he's player number 1. So we gotta stress test him in a variety of scenarios and see how he plays. For all we joke that Ichiban Kasuga is a madman, it's pretty common for him to react to weirdness by throwing his hands up and going, "This is too stupid, even for me," before getting pulled in kicking and screaming. It's a gag I find far more stock. While there are still moments which get a laugh out of me, it tends to be when Ichiban is on the insanity's wavelength instead of above it. Though my favourite joke of the game is one that's weird but grounded. It's when his good nature backfires spectacularly, leading to him and Mr. Masochist sitting together in abject misery. But the humour overall is just a lot less to my tastes. Kiryu acting as the Frank Drebin to his world's insanity, while being blind to his own brand of absurdist stoicism, that's far more up my alley as far as jokes go. Ichiban is this absurd mix where in some ways he is more outlandish than Kiryu, but taken on the whole, he's also more of a normal guy, and this means the general insanity of the world has had to increase to accommodate. I'm not going to pretend some weird shit didn't happen in old Yakuza, but because it was more grounded, these tears in the fabric of reality ripped a whole lot louder. I'm not exactly fond of this change, but I do get it. There have been several hundred Substories by now. You have to up the ante to keep coming up with fresh ideas. My issue is that it has seeped into the main scenario, but that's more of an issue for later games. And don't get me wrong, insanity is far from all that's on the menu. There is still a wide spread of Substory types exploring many different emotions, and there's enough grounded, character-focused stories which warm my heart and really reaffirm just why I like Ichiban. Another thing I dislike, however, is they all have Ichiban by his lonesome. Only story-mandated Substories feature other party members. Now, I understand that drink links, party chats, and table talks more than fill the void here, and this does actually help the game's sense of taking place over a longer time frame by showing downtime away from the group. But I would have liked to see other characters step in occasionally to offer insights and see how they might handle these less intense situations. I'd have loved to see Adachi help the old batter, or investigate the apparent masked killer terrorizing Koreatown. It would have been great to see Nanba's begging skills aiding Megumi's quest to collect money for her sick brother, Saiko's nightlife expertise helping an aging dominatrix and Mr. Masochist, Sho could have added extra flavor to this story about a young cook trying to prepare himself to inherit his father's restaurant, and I can see Han getting really into doing a traffic census. They didn't have to be everywhere, but the benefit of Substories is exploring characters in these lower stakes situations. Ichiban is fun enough to hold these stories up, but I feel like a great many character moments were just left on the table. I understand why they didn't do it. Given how skittish one of these lot is in particular, it would require time-gating substories, which is often seen as massively inconvenient. Hang on a damn minute. You already time-gate substories. Sure, it's a tiny amount, but it's not like they're outright opposed to it. I may be in a minority, but I'm willing to sacrifice convenience if it allows for more opportunities. Seeing as some of my favourite substories from 4 and 5 were the group ones, I can't help but find it a missed opportunity no matter how sensible the decision was. And while this is really funny, it does then take me out of it when they just appear during the mandatory ending fight. Especially when it means some poor overzealous dad is suddenly getting ganked by the Ichigang, who materialize out of thin air to punish this guy for the crime of being a bit overprotective of his son. Let's go back to where Ichi's new life began for a moment. I personally feel we leave the homeless camp a little too quickly. It's one of the most detailed spots in Yokohama. It clearly has a rich history and unique social structure, yet the story spares no time getting us out of there. To make up for that, it's also the only area in the game which gets focused expansion in substories. We even find a body in the garbage tens of hours before we learn about the deal they've got going on. Hey, idiots. Don't you know this is an Arakawa operation? Oh wait, shit, forget I said that. Nanba yelled it's not as simple as dragging everyone to hello work, and having taken that on board, Ichiban actually mucks in, getting down and dirty with solving some specific problems. In the process, the game not only explores some of the hardships they face, but how much motivation it takes to fight the uphill battle to escape on top of that. From how limited their opportunities are, to how difficult it even is to grasp those opportunities when all of your energy is spent just trying to survive, to the mockery they then get for daring to take those opportunities. While Ichiban will step in to fight their literal battles, when it comes to getting them out of their funk, he takes the approach Nanba preached. He doesn't force anyone's hands or merely try and shout them out of it. All he does is give them the direction and prodding they need to start facing their problems. And the game doesn't say this is an easy fix, but the start of a long process. Like many Yakuza games do, the substories re-examine the core themes through as many lenses as possible, which makes a great many in 7 about people fighting their way up from rock bottom. And the way it's presented is great. It offers a hopeful message that while there are many ways one can hit their lowest, there's just as many ways to climb back out. One substory in particular really grabbed me this time around, though it took a lot of legwork, both literal and imaginary on my part. Ichiban, after chucking a hobo's pet crawfish into the river, goes to great pains to return it, only to learn he's merely delivered the guy's dinner. Having formed a connection to the poor thing, the crawfish not the man, he winds up cutting a deal. Her life for a sushi box. Now, at this point, I couldn't actually remember where to get one, but I knew it wasn't in any part of town I was yet leveled for. I could have held off, or been lame and retreated through, but I decided sod it, we're going on an adventure. Now, the quest to the corner shop may not sound like a fantasy epic, but it wound up being an unexpected highlight of my playthrough. I somehow wound up in this perfect emotional flow state. I bought into the adventure I made up on the spot as I trekked deeper into the city, not entirely sure in which shop I'd find this mythical sushi set. I genuinely can't tell you why this happened. All I know is, I would be a lot happier if I could enter this headspace more often. And that brings me to the fact that during the making of this video, I thought it only sensible to go on my own dragon side quest, and play the game which not only captured Ichiban's imagination, but has clearly held it hostage since. I went and played Dragon Quest. Now, I'll confess, I didn't finish it. As should be obvious by this stage, I'm not a JRPG guy. But I will say, I actually rather enjoyed it. Why is this relevant now? Well, it got me in this headspace with much greater frequency than far more advanced titles have ever quite managed. The simplicity is charming and the combat delightfully Moorish. The thing that took me most, however, was how in lacking certain conveniences the genre gradually developed, it wound up pronouncing the feeling of adventure in a way more forthcoming games can't do. You can't see monster health bars. Your spells don't have their MP or effects readily listed. You can't even tell how much of an upgrade equipment is until you've tested it in battle. From a certain angle, these are all negative, but it led to a game where I had to actually feel out monsters, remember roughly how much it takes to slay them, and in turn get an idea of how dangerous they are, figured out over multiple encounters. When my new sword suddenly felled them much faster, or my armor turned a grisly blow into a mere glancing one, it was a genuine tactile surprise. It felt rewarding in a way it couldn't have done if the shop had told me up front. All the while, I have to remember what my spells can do and how much I can afford to spend at any one moment. It was on me to remember what both I and my foes were capable of. By putting the responsibility on me to learn, retain, and effectively apply knowledge instead of having it easily supplied, it forced me to give the world weight. This weight is multiplied by the distance between very expensive inns and the singular place I can save. This turned every expedition into the wilds into a proper journey. I need to have an idea where I'm headed and what I'm trying to achieve. Going out without an objective puts me in needless peril. The greatest threat is never any one monster, it's me overextending. If I have a lapse in judgment or get cocky, I could be doomed several battles before I realize it. That's unless I've bought a very expensive item to escape, which is rewarding in and of itself because it's an item I had to first buy and experiment with. Using it correctly, therefore, has an adventurous quality. All of this gives Dragon Quest a compelling and addictive loop. More than once I returned to the castle thinking I'd save and put the game down, only to go, nah, you know what, one more trip. It's not only my stats that grew, but my experience, my confidence, that I can hold out just a little bit longer and make it a little bit further in the wilderness. And I never knew what I'd find. I went into the first dungeon expecting an experience bonanza. Instead, all I found were directions. Something I hadn't actually realized I needed yet, assuming I'd get them in more grandiose fashion. The surprise was memorable. The directions, however, were vague. It was left to me to remember, or remember to write them down. And it was on my shoulders to actually make sense of these directions using my own accrued knowledge of the world. What I got from this game was a great sense of trust. I wound up adoring this design. I've called it simple, but pure may be a better word. Later additions to the genre did advance the mechanics, but they wound up diluting this purity. There's always a little give and take. What would lead some to call this game antiquated, in actuality led to me having a truly fresh experience. Though I do understand why it was phased out. The only reason it can get away with telling the player so little is because there isn't much to tell. As games got more complicated and the mental load to play them greater, providing such information kept the experience from being frustrating. And the key skill games challenged moved from exploration to system mastery, with exploration being rewarded in secondary fashion. The reason Dragon Quest worked, and the reason this moment in Yakuza 7 worked, is because the distance of an adventure can be measured by how far you make it from the closest thing you know. Too many games nowadays tell you everything, which snubs adventure before it can even get out of the Shire. But for these few precious minutes, Yakuza 7 somehow had me right where it wanted me. I didn't know where the sushi was, nor if I was ready for the foes who stood in its way, but I pushed on regardless. That's not bad for what was in reality a trip to the shops. And this is how we saved Nancy. Now for the opposite, a sub-story which totally took me out of the experience. Picture it, Yokohama, 2019. A former Arakawa grunt with a heart of gold stalks the streets to root out evil, and he finds it in abundance. A merciless Yakuza trying to make off with milk from a helpless new father. He steps in to send the villain packing and we learn this man's story. A new dad struggling to keep things together. And just as he learns Ichiban's, it looks like history is repeating. A cry rings out from a nearby den of iniquity. The two join forces to help this new life, only to find an old, dead joke. From formula to formulaic, all in a moment. We got the big Gondawara on our hands here. You know how I feel seeing these guys 15 years on doing the exact same thing? I feel depressed. We've hit a very odd point in the Yakuza series. There's a downside to it realizing its own longevity and level of popularity which floats between cult and mainstream. It's not only becoming more self-referential, but pretty self-reverential too. Way too gung-ho about not only repeating standout moments, but trying to downright force iconography. Now I'm jumping ahead, but it's an issue which incubated with the response to Zero, starts really taking form during the Kiwamis, and is truly cemented by Infinite Wealth and the Guidance, with certain characters or groups being artificially contrived into ongoing importance when they were at best one-note gags. We've got the Gondawaras, the business chickens, Onamichio returning as a nationwide icon, the robots, and worst of all, the Obitarian. It comes across like they're trying to recreate the Nugget moment, and I do understand that. This had a profound impact on the series' popularity, but by getting progressively more wacky to try and synthesize this response, it feels desperate, and it only dilutes what possible impact each can individually have. Nugget worked because, well, it was a genuinely surprising and unique moment. But now I can't help but eye every sort of quirky character or event as if RGG is going, "Ooh, do you like 'em? Do you like 'em? Well, post about them online and don't worry, because they'll be back to make the same joke next game." And I don't like being this cynical, but I can't help but feel condescended to by this kind of pandering. It may seem like I'm treading a fine line, as I've praised returning characters in the past, but there's a world of difference in the handling. In the older titles you had Date's daughter Saya, the florist's son Takashi, Emoto, even the leaders of the color gangs. After their main story introductions, you'd get sub-stories to check in with them in the following titles. These were nice and low-key. You'd get a few jokes, but more than that, you'd get some character development. Then come Yakuza 4 when it seemed like the series was trying to move on, they all got a conclusion. Except you. Yeah, you. You needed a little longer to cook. But we won't hold that against you, yeah? The problem now is, the series is not only much less grounded, but it's hitting a cyclical point. There is no more moving on. Recurring elements are not going to be played the same way. They're not going to be treated as characters to advance with jokes acting in service of said advancement. They are icons or jokes first and foremost. Or, Lau Kalong. Yeah, turns out he isn't dead either. When I say no more moving on, I suppose I also mean from this mortal coil. Is there a single real bullet left in this universe? The point I'm trying to make is, I don't want to be questioning if I'm playing like a dragon or watching Little Britain. I'm not against fan service or returning characters in general, as should be plain by now. Look, this is a series where asset reuse is one of its virtues. But jokes aren't assets. If you think you can just plonk them in again with no new twist or subversion, you're just going to make people start resenting any and all returning elements, even though not all asset reuse is rendered equal. I'm with the crowd who dislike the Oba-san, though I'll cut her some slack for being useful back in the and her 80s. I genuinely wonder if people in Japan really like Etsuko, or else no one does, but someone at RGG finds the scorn she inspires funny. And if that's the case, I do respect it. And the thing is, it's not like RGG has forgotten how to do this in the way I like. In one sub-story, we find Jin, a full 10 years since his last appearance in Yakuza 3. The Korean star is now washed up, liquored up, and people have had it up to here with him. After beating sobriety into the guy, he explains how it all fell apart, digging into the dirt of the entertainment industry with even more gusto than 5 allowed itself. After stopping a sleazy producer from forcing himself on his manager, the two were blacklisted from the biz, and Jin fell to alcohol to cope with his fading star. It's only after running into a fan, her not quite realizing it's the same man from her favourite film, our Winter Sonata. Oh hey, I watched that. It was a medium movie to sit through. Well, it's only after this does he realise what his work meant to people. And with the help of an honest celebrity journalist, don't get too unrealistic now, he decides to tidy up his image and make a serious go at stardom again. It's sappy, but I really like this sub-story. I like tracking characters from one entry to the next, but to track something, it has to be moving. I love that this is how the illusion is broken. He hit rock bottom so hard his facade shattered, turning him into something more than a simple joke about vainglorious celebrities and annoying fans. There's one of the exciting possibilities in how long this series has been going. Jin had been a joke for what, 13 years? Now all of a sudden he's a person with depth, achieved via a thoughtful tie to the through line of starting over from scratch. Returning characters can breathe life into a series. Repeating jokes kills interest quicker than anything else. The selection of sub-stories with bespoke mechanics is once again pretty thin. Besides Mr. Masochist, which is arguably a joke that could have worked in real time, none really make use of the new format in an interesting way. The Michi Minefield is a hidden object hunt, Traffic Sensor Sensei is a counting puzzle, Bubble Bubble Toil and Troubles us with a stealth section, with an admittedly amusing scenario, even if the gameplay is trivial. I don't begrudge this too much, but I feel like this game lacks 1 or 2 big-ticket sub-stories which bring something big and unexpected to the table. I mean, there is a monkey and an excavator which is arguably both, but as you can see, I'm hard to please. The reason I bring this up is because the older games allowed the sub-stories to be capable of mechanical surprise. They tried to mix up the formula in some way on occasion. This is valuable not just for keeping things memorable, but keeping the idea of exploration enticing. Sure, 90% of sub-stories, while entertaining, are going to play out the same way, but what if this next one doesn't? This has been replaced by sub-stories which act as tutorials for side activities, which isn't a bad thing by itself, but I am finding it's a way in which the games are standardizing, and in doing so, making themselves less capable of surprise. Now I know all human experiences can be boiled down to walking somewhere and mashing A at someone until a perfunctory battle happens, unless there happens to be a minigame bolted on. Part of this does come down to the shifting scale and cost of development, and this series going on for so long that coming up with new things does necessarily get trickier. Now if a mechanic is going to be produced, it's going to have to justify its time, effort, and imagination. One sub-story highlights something I definitely have liked more of. The Miracle of Spice has Ichiban solving a series of mundane or cliched scenarios with the aid of a super spicy kimchi a failing salesman just can't shift, saving the man's business and unlocking a unique vendor who sells this miracle grub. I quite like this sub-story. It repeatedly got me laughing, actually leveraging its more rigid presentation to make punchlines hit harder. Plus, it's the level of insanity I like seeing Ichiban operating at. But as to what this side quest uniquely has, while this isn't the only instance of a sub-story unlocking a vendor, it is the one truly unique item I'd argue you can find, the miracle kimchi affecting your turn order. Now, more than poundmates and violating child labour laws, this is the kind of extrinsic reward I want out of sub-stories. Genuinely new gimmicks and tools I can take with me into the main game. We do open up the pawn shop via a sub-story, helping the owner process his wife's passing and carry her torch rather than burn down everything they built together. So this isn't a unique shot by the series standards, but the circumstances surrounding it are. It's a small way to show Ichiban having a positive effect on the world around him. But that's really it. There are still a handful of sub-stories left, and I'm not lying when I say they're a handful. We'll come back to them when the time is, while not right, appropriate? Okay, they're never appropriate either, but look, if you know, you know. We've got a brother from another mother we should probably smother to deal with.